The first time Claire Morrison called Nikolai Sorin a bad boy, she was drunk enough to miss the bodyguards flanking him and the blood still fresh on his cufflinks. The second time she saw him, he was standing in her diner with a contract that would erase her mother's medical debt and her freedom. Some women fall for dangerous men. Claire fell into a world where love was a transaction, protection came with a price. And the most terrifying thing wasn't the monster she'd stumbled into, it was realizing she didn't want to leave. If you're watching, hit that like button and comment your city below so I can see how far Claire's story travels. Now, let's begin. The neon signs of the Meridian District bled through the rain-slicked streets like open wounds, pulsing red and gold against the darkness. Claire Morrison stood on the corner of 5th and Ashford, staring at the chrome entrance of Elysium, the kind of nightclub where velvet ropes separated the haves from the have-nots, and she was decidedly in the latter category. "This is a terrible idea," she muttered, but her best friend Jenna was already pulling her toward the door, stilettos clicking against wet pavement. "It's your birthday," Jenna said, her voice bright with tequila and bad decisions. "You've been working yourself into the ground for 2 years. One night, Claire. Just one night where you're not thinking about hospital bills or double shifts." Claire wanted to argue. She wanted to say that she couldn't afford even the cover charge, that she should be home researching clinical trials for her mother's treatment, that she had the early shift at the diner in 6 hours. But the words died in her throat because Jenna was right about one thing. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt young, so she followed. The bouncer barely glanced at Jenna's fake VIP pass before unhooking the velvet rope. The bass hit Claire like a physical force as they descended into the club, all black marble and crystal chandeliers, bodies moving in sync with music that cost more to produce than she made in a month. The air smelled like expensive cologne and poor choices. "Shots," Jenna announced, dragging Claire toward the bar. 3 tequilas later, the edges of Claire's anxiety had blurred into something manageable. 4 tequilas later, she was laughing at Jenna's impression of their manager at the diner. 5 tequilas later, she'd forgotten why she was supposed to be anxious at all. "I need to pee," Claire announced, sliding off her bar stool with less grace than intended. "Don't get lost," Jenna called after her, but her voice was already swallowed by the music. Claire navigated through the crowd, her vision pleasantly soft around the edges. The bathrooms were supposed to be near the back, or maybe upstairs. The club was a labyrinth of VIP sections and private lounges, each more exclusive than the last. She found a staircase lined with more velvet rope and a small sign that said, "Authorized personnel only." In her tequila-soaked state, Claire decided authorized personnel was a suggestion, not a rule. The second floor was quieter, the music muffled to a low throb. The hallway stretched before her, all dark wood and dim lighting, doors marked with brass numbers. She tried the bathroom door, but it was locked. The next door was locked too. The third door, however, opened with a soft click. "Finally," she breathed, stumbling inside. It wasn't a bathroom. The room was enormous, all floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, leather furniture that probably cost more than her mother's hospital debt, and a bar that could have stocked a small restaurant. And there, sitting in a high-backed chair like some kind of modern-day king, was a man who made every alarm bell in Claire's survival instinct try desperately to ring through the tequila haze. He was maybe 35, dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble, all sharp angles and cold beauty. His suit was black, perfectly tailored, and even drunk. Claire could tell it cost more than her car. But it was his eyes that made her stomach drop, pale gray, like winter ice, and currently fixed on her with an intensity that should have sent her running. Behind him stood 2 men who were definitely not club staff. They wore suits too, but theirs strained against shoulders built for violence. One of them moved toward Claire, his hand already reaching inside his jacket. "Sorry," Claire blurted, taking a step back. "I was looking for the bathroom. This club is like a maze, you know. Whoever designed it clearly never had to pee after 5. She hiccuped. 4? Maybe 6 tequilas. The man in the chair held up one hand and the bodyguard froze mid-step. "You're lost," the man said. His voice was low, controlled, each word measured like it cost him something to speak. "Super lost," Claire agreed, nodding enthusiastically. But in my defense, that authorized personnel sign was really small, and I'm pretty sure the bathroom shouldn't require authorization anyway. That's like a basic human right. Something flickered across the man's face, surprise maybe, or the ghost of amusement. He leaned forward slightly, and that's when Claire noticed his cufflinks. They were silver, expensive, and stained with something dark that looked suspiciously like blood in the dim light. She should have been terrified. Some part of her brain, the part not pickled in tequila, was screaming at her to run. But the alcohol had turned down the volume on her common sense and turned up the volume on her mouth. "Are you hurt?" she asked, gesturing vaguely at his cufflinks. "No." "Then why—" Understanding dawned, slow and tequila delayed. "Oh. Oh, that's not your blood." "No." Claire knew she should leave. She knew she should apologize again, back out of the room, and never look back. But there was something about the way he was looking at her, like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve, that kept her rooted in place. "You know," she said, leaning against the doorframe for support, "you've got this whole bad boy thing going on. The mysterious brood, the expensive suit, the ominous bodyguards. But I bet underneath all that, you're probably just a regular guy who happens to have terrible taste in nightclubs." The room went so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat over the muffled bass from downstairs. One of the bodyguards made a sound that might have been a strangled cough. The other one looked like he was contemplating all the ways he could make her disappear. But the man in the chair, he smiled. It was a small thing, barely there, but it transformed his face from carved ice to something almost human. "A regular guy," he repeated, as if testing the words. "Sure. I mean, we're all just people, right? Some of us just have better tailors and worse hobbies." Claire gestured at his blood-stained cuffs again. "What happened anyway? Bar fight? Disagreement about bottle service?" "Something like that." "Well, next time maybe try talking it out. Violence is never the answer." She paused, reconsidering. "Unless it's in self-defense, or if someone's being really awful, or, okay, sometimes violence might be appropriate, but as a general rule, talking is better." "I'll keep that in mind," he said, and this time there was definitely amusement in his voice. "Good." Claire nodded decisively. "Anyway, I should probably find my friend before she thinks I fell in a toilet or got kidnapped or something. Sorry for barging in, Mr. Bad Boy. Try not to get any more blood on your fancy clothes." She turned to leave, proud of herself for maintaining some dignity despite the tequila, when his voice stopped her. "Your name?" It wasn't a question. Claire turned back, squinting at him through the pleasant blur of alcohol. "What?" "I want to know your name." Something in his tone made her pause, made that survival instinct try one more time to break through the haze, but she was drunk and reckless, and so tired of being afraid of everything. "Claire," she said. "Claire Morrison. And you are?" "Intrigued," he said softly. Before she could ask what that meant, one of the bodyguards stepped forward, this time with purpose. "Miss Morrison, I'll escort you back downstairs." It wasn't a suggestion. Claire let herself be guided out of the room, down the hallway, and back to the main floor of the club. She found Jenna near the bar, frantic with worry. "Where the hell were you?" Jenna demanded. "I was about to call the police." "Got lost looking for the bathroom. Met a really intense guy upstairs. Pretty sure he was up to something illegal, but he had great cheekbones, so it's fine." Jenna stared at her. "How drunk are you?" "Very," Claire admitted. "Can we go home? I have work in the morning." They left Elysium in a blur of goodbyes and stumbled taxi rides. By the time Claire fell into her bed in her cramped studio apartment, the night had already started to feel like a dream. She'd forget about the man in the private lounge, about his cold eyes and bloody cuffs, about the way he'd looked at her like she was something rare. Or at least she thought she would. She had no way of knowing that upstairs in that private lounge, Nikolai Sorin was pulling out his phone and making a call. "Find out everything about Claire Morrison," he said into the receiver, his eyes still fixed on the doorway where she'd stood moments before. Everything. Because for the first time in 15 years since he'd built his empire on fear and blood and bodies that would never be found, someone had looked at him and seen just a man, a bad boy with good cheekbones and poor taste in nightclubs. It was laughable, really. It was also the most honest thing anyone had said to him in years. And Nikolai Sorin did not forget things that intrigued him. Claire woke up to sunlight stabbing through her thin curtains and a hangover that felt like divine punishment. Her mouth tasted like regret and bottom-shelf tequila, and her phone was buzzing with the insistence of a hornet trapped in a jar. "Stop," she groaned, reaching for it blindly. It was her alarm. She had 30 minutes to get to the diner for the breakfast rush. The next hour was a blur of cold showers, burnt toast, and a bus ride where every pothole felt like a personal attack from the universe. By the time she pushed through the doors of Rosie's diner, still tying her apron, her manager's expression told her she was in for a lecture. "You're late, Morrison." 3 minutes, Frank. There was traffic." "Traffic is not an excuse when you take the bus. The bus runs on a schedule." Claire bit back a response about how Frank had never taken public transportation in his life and plastered on her customer service smile. "It won't happen again." It probably would, but Frank didn't need to know that. The morning shift was brutal. Endless coffee refills, breakfast orders that all sounded the same, and tips that barely covered her bus fare. By noon, Claire's feet ached. Her head was still pounding, and she'd seriously considered whether anyone would notice if she just lay down on the floor and stayed there. She was clearing table 7 when the bell above the door chimed. Claire didn't look up. After 2 years at Rosie's, she could tell a customer's order by the sound of their footsteps. These footsteps, though, were different. Measured, deliberate. Expensive shoes on cheap linoleum. "Sit anywhere you'd like," she called out, balancing a stack of dirty plates. "I'll be right with you." She dropped the plates in the dish bin and grabbed a menu, turning toward the new customer with her well-practiced smile. The smile died on her face. He was sitting in the booth by the window, the same man from last night, from the private lounge, though in the harsh fluorescent light of the diner, he looked somehow more dangerous. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by dark slacks and a black button-down that probably still cost more than her rent, but it was the same face, the same ice-gray eyes, and he was looking directly at her. "No," Claire whispered. "No, no, no." This couldn't be happening. Last night was supposed to be a drunken mistake, a story to laugh about with Jenna over cheap wine. It wasn't supposed to follow her here, to her day job, to her real life. But there he was, sitting in booth 4 like he owned it, like he owned the whole damn diner. Claire's first instinct was to run. Her second was to hide in the kitchen and pretend she'd never existed. Her third, and the one she unfortunately went with, was to walk over there and do her job because she needed this paycheck and couldn't afford to look like she was losing her mind. "Welcome to Rosie's," she said, her voice barely steady. "What can I get you?" He didn't open the menu. "Coffee? Black." "Great. Anything else?" "Information." Claire's hand trembled slightly as she wrote down his order. "We have pancakes, eggs, bacon, all the usual diner stuff. If you want the special, it's meatloaf, but between you and me, yesterday's batch was better." "I don't want food, Miss Morrison. I want to talk." The way he said her name, like he'd been holding it in his mouth, testing its shape, made her skin prickle. "I'm working," she said firmly. "I'll get your coffee." She retreated to the counter, her heart hammering against her ribs. Frank was in the back. The cook was buried in lunch orders, and the only other waitress was on her break. Claire was alone with a man who'd had blood on his cufflinks last night and had somehow found out where she worked. She poured the coffee with shaking hands, trying to think. She could call the police, but what would she say? A man is sitting in my diner ordering coffee? That he looked at me in a nightclub? She had no proof of anything except that he made every nerve in her body scream danger. When she brought the coffee to his table, he was looking out the window at the street beyond, at the pawn shop across the road, the check-cashing place with bars on the windows, the bus stop where she waited every morning. "Your neighborhood is rough," he observed. "It's affordable. It's dangerous. So is drunk wandering into private lounges, apparently. But here we are." Claire set the coffee down harder than necessary. "How did you find me?" "I know a great deal about you, Claire Morrison. I know you're 24 years old. I know you work 3 jobs, this diner, a bar on weekends, and night shifts at a convenience store. I know you live in a studio apartment on Maple Street that should have been condemned 2 years ago. I know your mother is in hospice care at County General and that her medical bills are drowning you." Claire felt the blood drain from her face. "You have no right." "I know you're exhausted," he continued, his voice quiet but relentless. "I know you skip meals to save money. I know you take the bus because your car broke down 4 months ago and you can't afford to fix it. I know you haven't had a real night's sleep in 18 months. Stop. Her voice cracked. Just stop. He finally looked at her, and there was something in his expression that might have been pity if it came from anyone else. From him, it looked like calculation. Sit down, Claire. I'm working. Your manager just left through the back door, and your only other waitress is smoking in the alley. Sit down. Claire wanted to refuse. She wanted to throw the coffee in his face and tell him to get out. But her legs were shaking, and suddenly sitting seemed like the only thing keeping her from falling down. She slid into the booth across from him, maintaining as much distance as the table would allow. What do you want? She asked. To make you an offer. I don't want anything from you. You don't even know what I'm offering. I don't care. Last night was a mistake. I was drunk, I was lost, and I'm sorry if I interrupted something important, but that's where this ends. You go back to your life, I go back to mine, and we pretend we never met. Nikolai took a sip of his coffee, studying her over the rim of the cup. That's not how this works. Then explain to me how this works, because right now it feels a lot like stalking. I'm offering you a solution to your problems, Claire. All of them. I don't have any problems. Your mother is dying. The words hit her like a slap. Claire's hands clenched into fists on the table. Don't you dare! She has stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors at County General give her 6 months, maybe less. The chemo isn't working anymore. They've suggested hospice because they can't afford to waste resources on a patient with no insurance and no hope. Tears burned in Claire's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Get out. But there are other treatments, experimental trials, private facilities with specialists who've had success with cases like hers. They're expensive, of course, prohibitively so for someone in your position. I said get out. I can move her today. Nikolai leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. One phone call, and she's transferred to Mercy Heights Medical Center, private room. The best oncologist in the state. Every treatment option available, no matter the cost. Her pain managed properly. Nurses who actually have time to care for her instead of just cycling through medications. Claire felt like she couldn't breathe. Why would you do that? Because I want something from you. I don't have anything you could possibly want. You have yourself. The diner suddenly felt very small, very quiet. Even the clatter from the kitchen seemed distant. I don't understand, Claire whispered. Nikolai reached into his jacket, that same gesture his bodyguard had made last night, and pulled out a folder. He slid it across the table. Inside were documents, medical records, financial statements. All of it was about her mother, about her debts, about the life Claire had been trying desperately to hold together. Your mother's care fully paid. Your debts erased. Your jobs unnecessary. In exchange, you come work for me. Work for you doing what? Being mine. Claire laughed, the sound sharp and slightly hysterical. You want me to what? Be your girlfriend, your mistress? This is insane. I want you to belong to me, he corrected. In public, you'll be introduced as someone under my protection. In private, you'll live in my home, attend my events, and be available when I need you. Available for what? Companionship, conversation. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. Whatever I decide. Claire shoved the folder back across the table. No, absolutely not. I'm not some object you can buy. Everyone can be bought, Claire. It's just a matter of finding the right price. Well, you found the wrong person because I'm not for sale. My mother wouldn't want this. She'd rather die than know I sold myself to some... She gestured at him helplessly. Some criminal with a god complex. Your mother is already dying. The question is whether she does it in pain, in a room that smells like disinfectant and despair, or whether she spends her last months comfortable and cared for. Nikolai's voice was calm, almost gentle. And whether you spend the rest of your life wondering if you could have saved her. It was the cruelest thing anyone had ever said to her, made worse because it was true. Claire stood up, the booth scraping against the floor. You need to leave. I'll give you 24 hours to think about it. I don't need 24 hours. The answer is no. Then I'll check back in 24 hours anyway. He stood as well, leaving a $100 bill on the table for a cup of coffee he'd barely touched. For what it's worth, Claire, I'm not a bad man. I'm simply a man who takes what he wants. That's literally the definition of a bad man. He smiled, that same small, almost human smile from last night. You called me a bad boy. There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing. Nikolai walked to the door, then paused. Your mother's name is Margaret. She loves old movies, especially musicals. Her favorite is Singin' in the Rain. She watches it on the small TV in her room at County General whenever she's strong enough to stay awake. Claire felt her throat close up. How do you... 24 hours, Claire. Think about what she'd want you to do. Then he was gone, the bell above the door chiming cheerfully in his wake. Claire stood there for a long moment, staring at the $100 bill on the table and the folder full of her life's worst moments. Her hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. Frank emerged from the back, looking annoyed. Who is that? And why aren't you clearing table 9? I need to make a phone call, Claire said distantly. You need to do your job. Frank, I really need to make a phone call. Something in her voice must have gotten through to him, because he waved her toward the back. 5 minutes. That's it. Claire called County General from the diner's ancient landline, her heart in her throat. I'm calling about Margaret Morrison, she said when the hospice nurse answered. I'm her daughter. Is everything okay? Oh, Claire, yes. Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually. You should have told us you were working on getting her transferred. The administrator just called. Mercy Heights Medical Center is sending an ambulance this afternoon. It's all been arranged and paid for. The phone slipped from Claire's fingers, clattering against the wall. Claire, are you there? She picked it up with numb fingers. I need to speak to my mother. She's sleeping right now, honey. She had a rough night, but I'll tell her you called, and you can visit her at the new facility tomorrow. They say it's beautiful there, like a hotel, not a hospital. Claire hung up without saying goodbye. He'd already done it. He'd moved her mother without waiting for her answer, without her permission. He'd made it impossible to say no, because saying no now meant taking her mother away from the care she desperately needed, away from specialists who might actually help her, away from a chance at dignity in her final months. It was manipulation. It was cruel. It was also the kindest thing anyone had done for Claire in 2 years. She walked back to the main floor in a daze, barely hearing Frank's complaints about her extended break. She moved through the rest of her shift on autopilot, refilling coffees and taking orders and smiling when appropriate. But all she could think about was her mother's face the last time she'd visited, gaunt and gray, her eyes hollow with pain that the county hospital couldn't afford to properly manage. All she could think about was the stack of bills on her kitchen counter, the collection calls she'd stopped answering, the weight of trying to save someone who was already slipping away. 24 hours, he'd said. But Claire already knew what her answer would be, because at the end of the day she would do anything to save her mother, even if it meant damning herself in the process. That night, Claire stood outside Mercy Heights Medical Center, staring up at the building like it might hold answers. It was beautiful, all glass and modern architecture, with a fountain in the courtyard and actual trees in the landscaping. It looked nothing like County General, with its peeling paint and overcrowded waiting rooms. She'd called ahead. Her mother was settled in room 412. The nurses said she was already sleeping better, that the pain management specialist had visited, that tomorrow they'd start running tests to see what treatment options were available. Claire should have been happy. This was what she'd been fighting for, what she'd been working herself to exhaustion trying to afford. But all she felt was the weight of what it would cost her. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her press accept. Hello? Miss Morrison, Nikolai's voice smooth and certain. Have you visited your mother yet? How did you get this number? I have your number, your address, your social security information, and your coffee order from the diner. Do you really want to waste time asking questions you already know the answer to? Claire closed her eyes. What do you want? I want to know if you've made your decision. You already made it for me. I gave you options. You're choosing to focus on the one that requires sacrifice. You manipulated me. You moved my mother before I could even think about your offer. I moved your mother because she needed care immediately, and I could provide it. Your decision is separate from that. His voice softened slightly. If you say no, she stays at Mercy Heights. Her care continues. You owe me nothing. Claire's throat tightened. You're lying. I don't lie, Claire. It's inefficient. Then why make the offer at all? Why give me a choice if you're going to take care of her anyway? There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Nikolai spoke again, his voice was quieter. Because I want you to choose me. Not because you have to, not because you're trapped, but because part of you, even a small part, wants to see what this could be. This is insane. Yes, I don't even know you. You will. Claire leaned against the cold glass of the medical center, her breath fogging the window. Inside, her mother was sleeping in a real bed, with real care, probably more comfortable than she'd been in months. And all it had cost was Claire's soul. Except Nikolai was saying it didn't have to cost anything, that she could walk away. But they both knew that was a lie. Maybe he wouldn't take her mother's care away. Claire actually believed him about that. But Claire would never forgive herself for walking away from someone who'd saved her mother's life. The debt would eat her alive. If I say yes, she said slowly, I want terms. Name them. My mother never knows about this arrangement. As far as she's concerned, I got a really good job with incredible health insurance. Agreed. I want to visit her whenever I want, no restrictions. Agreed. And if I want out, if this becomes too much, I can leave. Another pause. There will be consequences to leaving. What kind of consequences? Your mother's care continues regardless, but you'll owe me a debt, and I collect my debts. So I'm not really free to leave. You're free to do anything you want, Claire, but every choice has a price. That's not manipulation, that's reality. She should hang up. She should walk away, go back to her apartment, and figure out some other way to make this work. But there was no other way. There never had been. I need time to think, she said finally. You have until tomorrow morning. I'll send a car for you at 9. And if I'm not ready by then I'll wait. But your mother doesn't have time for you to wait, and we both know it. The line went dead. Claire stood there in the cold, watching her breath mist in the air, and wondered at what point she'd lost control of her life. Maybe it was when her mother got sick. Maybe it was when she'd stumbled into that private lounge last night. Or maybe it was years ago, when she dropped out of college to take care of her mom and had never quite managed to climb back out of the hole. It didn't matter anymore. At 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, she would make a choice that would change everything. And the worst part was, she already knew what that choice would be. Inside the medical center, Margaret Morrison slept peacefully for the first time in months, unaware that her daughter was about to sell her soul to save her life. And somewhere across the city, Nikolai Soren sat in his penthouse office, a glass of whiskey in his hand, and waited for the woman who'd called him a bad boy to realize she'd stepped into the orbit of something far more dangerous than she could have imagined. The black car arrived at 8:57, 3 minutes early, like punctuality was a threat. Claire watched it from her apartment window. A sleek Mercedes with tinted windows that probably cost more than everything she'd ever owned combined. The driver stepped out, a man in his 50s with the posture of someone who'd spent time in the military, and waited by the passenger door with his hands clasped in front of him. She had 3 minutes to change her mind. 2 minutes. 1. Claire grabbed her purse, a worn leather thing held together with hope and a safety pin, and walked out of her apartment without looking back. If she looked back, she might see all the reasons to stay. The coffee maker that only worked if you hit it twice on the left side. The water stain on the ceiling that looked like a rabbit if you squinted. The stack of bills on the counter that she'd never have to worry about again. The driver opened the door as she approached. Miss Morrison? That's me, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The interior of the car smelled like leather and money. Claire slid across the seat and the door closed behind her with the kind of solid thunk that said this vehicle could probably survive a missile strike. The driver got in without a word, and they pulled away from the curb, leaving her old life behind at exactly 9 o'clock. She'd texted Jenna last night, a carefully constructed lie about getting a live-in position with a wealthy family who needed someone to manage their household. Jenna had been thrilled, sending back a string of emojis and demands for details Claire couldn't provide. She'd called Frank at the diner and quit over voicemail at 2 in the morning, her voice shaking as she apologized for not giving 2 weeks' notice. The convenience store and the bar had gotten similar messages. Burning bridges was supposed to feel liberating. Instead, it felt like free-falling without a parachute. The drive took them through parts of the city Claire had only seen from bus windows, neighborhoods where the streets were clean and the buildings didn't have bars on the windows, where people walked small dogs and carried shopping bags from stores she couldn't afford to browse. The car climbed into the hills overlooking downtown, where the houses became estates and the estates became private kingdoms. They passed through a security gate that looked like it could withstand a siege, up a winding driveway lined with trees that had been carefully manicured into submission, and finally stopped in front of a building that made Claire's apartment look like a cardboard box by comparison. Nikolai's penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a glass and steel tower that seemed to touch the clouds. The building was all sharp angles and modern architecture, the kind of place that appeared in magazines with titles like luxury living that normal people only read in dentist waiting rooms. The driver opened her door. "Mr. Soren is waiting for you on the main floor. The elevator requires a key card, which I'll provide." Claire stepped out onto marble pavers, her cheap shoes clicking against stone that probably came from some Italian quarry with a waiting list. The entrance was all floor-to-ceiling windows and a door that whispered open before she could reach for the handle. Inside the lobby was an exercise in expensive minimalism, white marble floors, abstract art that probably cost more than her mother's entire treatment, and a security desk manned by 2 guards who looked like they could kill her with a pencil if they felt motivated. "Miss Morrison," one of them said, his tone professionally neutral. "Welcome. Mr. Soren has been expecting you." He handed her a key card on a lanyard, the kind of sleek black plastic that probably opened doors to places she didn't want to imagine. The elevator doors slid open without her touching anything, like the building itself was welcoming her into its expensive embrace. The ride up was smooth and silent, the kind of elevator that didn't make her stomach drop or her ears pop. Instead, it felt like floating, like gravity was a suggestion rather than a rule. The doors opened onto a private foyer with a single door at the end. It opened before she could knock. Nikolai stood in the doorway, dressed in charcoal slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and Claire was struck again by how wrong he looked in normal lighting. In the nightclub, he'd been dangerous and distant. In the diner, he'd been a threat wrapped in expensive clothes. But here, in his own space, he looked almost human. Almost. "You came," he said, and there was something in his voice that might have been surprise. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I thought you might try to run. Most people would." "I'm not most people," Claire said, stepping past him into the penthouse before her courage failed. The space beyond was breathtaking in the way things are when they cost more than you'll make in a lifetime. The main room was enormous, all windows and white furniture, with a view of the city that made her feel like she was standing on top of the world. The kitchen was all marble countertops and appliances that probably required a manual, the kind of space where people made complicated meals instead of surviving on ramen and questionable leftovers. "This is where you live?" she asked, because saying something felt better than standing there in stunned silence. "This is where we live," he corrected. "As of now." Claire turned to face him, gripping her purse like it might anchor her to reality. "I need to know the rules." "There are only 3 rules," Nikolai said, closing the door behind him. "First, you don't leave without telling me where you're going. Second, when we're in public, you stay close to me. Third, what happens in this penthouse stays in this penthouse." That's vague. Intentionally so. "And what exactly do you expect to happen in this penthouse?" He moved closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something dark and expensive that probably came in a bottle shaped like architectural impossibility. "That depends on you." "I'm not sleeping with you," Claire said quickly, taking a step back. That wasn't part of the deal. "I don't recall making any demands about sleeping arrangements. You said I'd be available for whatever you decide. That sounds a lot like a demand." "I said companionship and conversation," Nikolai corrected, his gray eyes fixed on hers. "If I wanted a prostitute, Claire, I'd hire one. They're considerably less complicated." "Then what do you want from me?" "I want you here. I want you at dinners and events. I want people to see you with me and understand that you're under my protection." He paused. "And I want you to stop looking at me like I'm going to hurt you." "You're a criminal," she said flatly. "You had blood on your cufflinks. You stalk people and manipulate them into impossible situations. Of course I think you're going to hurt me. I've never hurt anyone who didn't deserve it." "And who decides what they deserve? You?" "Usually." He said it like it was the most natural thing in the world, like playing judge and executioner was just another item on his morning to-do list. Claire set her purse down on the nearest white couch, suddenly too tired to keep holding it. I need to see my mother. I'll have a car take you this afternoon. I can take the bus. No, you can't. You don't take the bus anymore, Claire. You don't work 3 jobs. You don't skip meals to pay bills. That life is over. Because you decided it was over. Because you accepted my offer. She wanted to argue, but he was right. She'd made a choice, and now she had to live with it. Even if living with it meant standing in a penthouse that cost more than a small country and trying not to feel like she'd just sold her soul. I should unpack, she said, looking around for her non-existent luggage. Except I didn't bring anything. Your clothes are in the master bedroom. I had them moved this morning. Claire felt her stomach drop. You went to my apartment? I sent people to your apartment. There's a difference. That's breaking and entering. It's efficient. You'll find everything organized by type and color. I also took the liberty of adding to your wardrobe. The things you owned were... He paused, searching for a word that wouldn't sound like an insult. Insufficient. Insufficient, Claire repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. My clothes were insufficient. For the life you're going to be living, yes. I like those clothes. They were mine. They're still yours. They're just supplemented now. Nikolai gestured toward the hallway. Second door on the right. Why don't you settle in, and we can discuss the details over lunch? Claire wanted to throw something at him, preferably something heavy and expensive, but she settled for walking down the hallway with as much dignity as she could manage. The second door on the right opened into a bedroom that was bigger than her entire apartment, all cool grays and soft whites, with a bed that looked like it belonged in a hotel suite and windows that offered another stunning view of the city. Her clothes were indeed organized in the walk-in closet, which was roughly the size of her old living room. Her worn jeans hung next to designer dresses she'd never picked for herself. Her 3 decent shirts were dwarfed by silk blouses in colors she didn't recognize, and her shoes, her practical, comfortable, falling-apart shoes, sat in neat rows beneath heels that looked like torture devices designed by someone who hated feet. She sank down onto the bed, the mattress so soft it felt like sitting on a cloud, and tried not to cry. This was what she'd agreed to. This was the price of her mother's life. A gilded cage was still a cage, even if the bars were made of Italian marble and designer clothing. Lunch was prepared by someone Claire never saw, appearing on the dining table like magic. Grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, and a salad that probably had ingredients she couldn't pronounce. Nikolai sat across from her, eating with the kind of precise movements that suggested he'd been raised by people who cared about which fork you used. Tell me about yourself, he said, like they were on a normal date instead of engaged in some kind of transactional relationship that made her skin crawl. You already know everything about me, Claire said, pushing a piece of salmon around her plate. You had me investigated. I know facts. I want to know you. Why? Because you're going to be living here. Because people are going to ask questions, and I'd prefer our answers to be consistent, and because I'm curious. Claire set down her fork. What do you want to know? Why did you drop out of college? My mom got sick. Someone had to take care of her. What were you studying? English literature. I wanted to be a teacher. She laughed, the sound bitter. Seems pretty stupid now. It's not stupid to want to help people. Says the man who had blood on his cufflinks. Nikolai's expression didn't change. That man was selling drugs to children. He'd been warned twice to stay out of the school districts. He didn't listen. So you killed him? I didn't say that. You didn't have to. They ate in silence for a moment, the clink of silverware against china the only sound. Claire hated that the food was delicious, that the apartment was beautiful, that some small part of her was already getting comfortable in this new life. It felt like a betrayal of everything she'd worked for, every sacrifice she'd made. I need to establish some boundaries, she said finally. I'm listening. This bedroom? It's mine. You don't come in without permission. Agreed. I'm not some trophy you parade around. If we go to events, you treat me with respect, not like property. I would never treat you like property, Claire. Property doesn't talk back. The corner of his mouth twitched. You, on the other hand, seem incapable of keeping quiet. Is that a problem? No, he said softly. It's refreshing. Claire didn't know what to do with that, so she changed the subject. When do I meet the rest of your organization? You don't. The fewer people who know about you, the safer you are. Safer from what? From people who would use you to get to me. Nikolai leaned back in his chair, studying her. I have enemies, Claire. Men who would hurt you just to watch me bleed. That's why you don't leave without telling me where you're going. That's why you stay close to me in public. It's not about control. It's about keeping you alive. Maybe I don't want to be kept alive if it means living like this. Too bad. You made a deal. A deal you manipulated me into. A deal that's saving your mother's life, he countered, his voice sharp. Don't pretend this is about morality, Claire. You made a choice, just like I make choices every day. The only difference is, I don't lie to myself about why. She wanted to argue, but the truth of it sat between them like a third presence at the table. She had made a choice. She'd walked into that car this morning knowing exactly what it meant. I want to visit my mother today, she said quietly. I'll have Marcus drive you. He was the driver this morning. He'll be your primary security from now on. I don't need security. You do now. Claire pushed away from the table, suddenly feeling trapped despite the enormous space around her. I need air. The terrace is through those doors. Nikolai gestured to a set of glass doors she hadn't noticed. Don't even think about jumping. It's a long way down, and I'd hate to lose you so soon after acquiring you. Acquiring me, Claire muttered, walking toward the doors. Like I'm a piece of furniture. Furniture doesn't interest me nearly as much as you do. The terrace was beautiful, of course, because everything in Nikolai's world seemed designed to be beautiful in the most suffocating way possible. There was outdoor furniture, potted plants that probably required a dedicated gardener, and a view that made the city look like a toy set spread out below them. Claire gripped the railing, the metal cold beneath her palms, and tried to remember how to breathe. She heard him come up behind her, his footsteps quiet against the stone. I know this is difficult, Nikolai said, his voice closer than she expected. You don't know anything. I know what it's like to make impossible choices. I know what it's like to sacrifice pieces of yourself to protect the people you love. And I know what it's like to wake up one day and realize you don't recognize the person staring back at you in the mirror. Claire turned to look at him, really look at him. In the afternoon sunlight, his gray eyes looked almost silver, and there were fine lines at the corners that suggested he didn't smile often. He was handsome in the way sharp objects are handsome, beautiful and dangerous and likely to draw blood. Why me? She asked. You could have anyone. Why choose some broke waitress you met in a nightclub? Because you looked at me like I was just a man, he said simply. Do you have any idea how rare that is? I was drunk. You were honest. Everyone else who looks at me sees the empire, or the reputation, or the danger. You saw a bad boy with good cheekbones. He almost smiled. It was the most genuine interaction I've had in years. That's sad. Yes, he agreed. It is. They stood there on the terrace, the city sprawling beneath them, and Claire felt the weight of her new reality settling over her shoulders like an expensive coat that didn't quite fit. She was trapped here, in this beautiful prison, with a man who seemed to collect people the way others collected art. But her mother was safe. That had to count for something, even if it cost Claire everything else. The visit to Mercy Heights that afternoon was both better and worse than Claire had imagined. Better because her mother looked more comfortable than she had in months, tucked into a hospital bed that actually seemed designed for human comfort instead of efficiency. The room was private, spacious, with afternoon sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked a garden instead of a parking lot. Worse, because Claire had to lie. Sweetheart, her mother said, her voice weak but warm. They told me you arranged all this. How did you manage it? I got a new job, Claire said, settling into the chair beside the bed. Live-in position with a family. Really good benefits. What kind of family? Wealthy, private. They wanted someone to manage their household. The lies came easier than they should have. The pay is incredible, Mom. Enough to cover everything. Margaret reached out with a trembling hand, and Claire took it, feeling the papery softness of her mother's skin. You don't have to take care of me like this. Yes, I do. Claire, Mom, please, let me do this. Let me give you this. Claire's voice cracked. You've spent your whole life taking care of me. Let me take care of you now. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. I'm so proud of you, baby. So proud of the woman you've become. Claire had to look away, blinking back her own tears. If her mother knew the truth, knew what she'd agreed to, what she was becoming, she wouldn't be proud. She'd be horrified. They spent the afternoon watching old movies on the room's flat-screen television, her mother drifting in and out of sleep while Gene Kelly danced across the screen in Singin' in the Rain. Every so often, a nurse would come in to check vitals or adjust medications, and they were kind, patient, actually present in a way the overworked staff at County General had never had time to be. This was what Nikolai's money bought. Not just treatment, but dignity. Not just care, but comfort. Claire hated that it mattered. She hated that she was grateful. When her mother fell into a deeper sleep, Claire stepped out into the hallway and found Marcus waiting by the elevator, his hands clasped in front of him like a sentinel. "Ready to go, Miss Morrison?" "Just Claire," she said. "Please just call me Claire." The ride back to the penthouse was quiet, the city lights starting to flicker on as evening approached. Claire watched the neighborhoods change from medical district to downtown to the expensive hills, each transition marking another step away from her old life. When they arrived, Nikolai was waiting in the living room with a glass of whiskey and a tablet computer. "How is she?" he asked. "Better, comfortable." Claire set her purse down. "Thank you for that." "You don't have to thank me. It's part of our arrangement." "I know, but still." "Thank you." He studied her for a moment, then gestured to the couch. "Sit. We need to discuss tomorrow night." Claire sat, keeping as much distance between them as the furniture allowed. "What's tomorrow night?" "A dinner. Business associates, their wives, people whose good opinion matters to my operations." He pulled up something on the tablet, then handed it to her. "I need you there." The screen showed a photo of a restaurant that looked like it required a reservation months in advance and a dress code enforced by armed guards. "What do I have to do?" "Be charming. Be pleasant. Let them see that you're with me." "That's it?" "That's it. Think you can manage?" Claire bristled at his tone. "I've been working customer service for years. I can smile and make small talk with the best of them." "This isn't a diner, Claire. These people will be analyzing everything about you, how you dress, how you speak, how you interact with me. They'll be looking for weakness. And if they find it, they won't. Because I'll have prepared you." He took back the tablet. "There's a dress in your closet, blue, floor length. Wear that. Marcus will give you a file on everyone who'll be there, names, positions, relationships. Study it. You're treating this like a military operation. In my world, dinner is a military operation." He finished his whiskey in one swallow. "These people smile while they plot your destruction. They make toasts while planning your funeral. If you're going to survive in this life, you need to understand that everyone is dangerous, including you, especially me." Claire stood up, suddenly exhausted by the weight of her new reality. "I'm going to bed." "Claire." His voice stopped her at the hallway entrance. "You did well today. With your mother, with adjusting to being here. I know this isn't easy. You have no idea how not easy this is." "I have some idea." He set down his glass. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be challenging." She escaped to her bedroom, closing the door behind her with perhaps more force than necessary. The blue dress was hanging in the closet, exactly where he said it would be, along with shoes that matched and jewelry that probably cost more than her rent. Everything perfectly coordinated, perfectly chosen, perfectly controlled. Claire changed into her own pajamas, one of the few personal items that had survived the transition to her new life, and climbed into the enormous bed. Outside the windows, the city glittered like scattered diamonds, beautiful and cold and distant. She fell asleep thinking about her mother's smile, about the comfort in that hospital room, about the price of safety and the cost of love. She fell asleep wondering at what point she'd stop feeling like a prisoner and start feeling like a person who belonged in this gilded world. She was still wondering when she woke up to sunlight streaming through windows she'd forgotten to cover and the smell of coffee brewing in a kitchen she didn't know how to use. Her first full day in the cage had begun. The file Marcus delivered with breakfast was thick enough to be a doctoral thesis, filled with photos and biographical information on 20 different people she'd never met but apparently needed to impress. Claire spread it across the dining table, studying faces and names while she picked at pastries that were too beautiful to be called breakfast. Dominic Russo, she read aloud, looking at the photo of a man in his 60s with silver hair and shark's eyes. Primary operations in shipping and imports. 3 ex-wives, 2 legitimate children, estimated net worth of $40 million. Don't mention the ex-wives, Nikolai said, appearing from his office with his own cup of coffee. He's sensitive about his failures. Aren't we all? Some of us more than others. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her study. What else? Alexandra Chen runs the East Side distribution networks, never married, has a Yorkshire Terrier named Valentino that she brings everywhere, including business meetings. Don't pet the dog. She hates when people pet the dog. Claire flipped through more pages. How do you keep track of all these people? Practice and necessity. Nikolai moved to sit across from her. In my world, information is currency. Know someone's weakness and you control them. Know their desires and you can manipulate them. Know their fears and you can destroy them, Claire finished. That's bleak. That's survival. She studied him over the rim of her coffee cup. He was wearing another expensive suit, this one charcoal with a subtle pinstripe, and his hair was slicked back in a way that made him look older, harder. This was the version of Nikolai Sorin the world saw, controlled, calculating, dangerous. Do you enjoy it? She asked. The power, the control, the fear. Does it matter? I'm curious. You said you wanted to know me. Seems fair that I get to know you too. Nikolai was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes distant. I enjoy the certainty. I enjoy knowing that when I make a decision, it happens. That when I say something, people listen. He paused. But enjoying the fear? No. Fear is a tool, Claire. It's not the goal. Then what is the goal? Not dying. Not losing what I've built. Not showing weakness to people who would exploit it the second I looked away. He set down his coffee cup with precise movements. You asked me yesterday why I chose you. Part of it was what I said. You looked at me like I was human. But part of it was simpler than that. What? You're not afraid to challenge me. Everyone else in my life either fears me or wants something from me. You just want to save your mother. His smile was slight, almost sad. It's remarkably uncomplicated. There's nothing uncomplicated about this situation. Compared to my usual relationships, this is remarkably simple. You're honest. You say what you mean. You don't play games. Claire laughed, sharp and bitter. That's because I don't know the rules of your games. Give me time. I'll learn. I hope you don't, Nikolai said quietly. I hope you stay exactly as brutally honest as you are right now. Before Claire could figure out how to respond to that, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and something shifted in his expression, the almost warmth disappearing behind ice. I have to take this, he said, already moving toward his office. Keep studying. We leave at 7. The door closed behind him, leaving Claire alone with her file full of dangerous people and her growing sense that she'd stepped into something far more complex than a simple transaction. Nikolai Sorin wasn't just a crime lord who'd bought her compliance. He was a man who'd built an empire on fear and blood and careful calculation. And somehow, impossibly, he seemed to think she was different from everyone else in his life. The worst part was, she was starting to believe him. She spent the rest of the day preparing for the dinner like she was studying for an exam she couldn't afford to fail. Names, faces, relationships, weaknesses, all of it absorbed and memorized until she could recite Dominic Russo's favorite scotch and Alexandra Chen's college major without looking at the notes. By 6 o'clock, she was as ready as she'd ever be. By 6:30, she was wearing the blue dress and questioning every decision that had led her to this moment. By 7, she was standing in the penthouse foyer with Nikolai, trying not to feel like she was being led to her execution. You look perfect, he said, and there was something in his voice that made her look up. He was staring at her like he was seeing her for the first time, his gray eyes intense and unreadable. The dress fit her like it had been made specifically for her body, which it probably had, and the sapphire necklace he'd left in a box on her dresser caught the light with every breath. I look like someone I'm not, Claire said. You look like someone who belongs at my side. He offered his arm. Shall we? Claire took his arm because refusing would have been childish, and they stepped into the elevator together. As the doors closed, she caught their reflection in the mirrored walls. Him in his perfect suit, her in her perfect dress, both of them playing parts in a performance she didn't fully understand. "Remember," Nikolai said quietly, "stay close to me. Don't engage unless someone speaks to you first. And whatever you do, don't mention what I actually do for a living." "What do you want me to say you do?" "Investment management, real estate development, anything vague and boring." "Got it. Lie convincingly." "No," he corrected. "Tell a version of the truth that people want to hear. There's a difference." The restaurant was exactly as pretentious as the photo suggested. All low lighting and expensive wine lists and waiters who looked like they'd murder you for using the wrong fork. Nikolai was greeted like visiting royalty, ushered to a private dining room where the other guests were already assembled. And just like that, Claire Morrison, waitress, dropout, desperate daughter, became someone else entirely. She became the woman on Nikolai Soren's arm, the one everyone wanted to know about and no one dared to question directly. She became part of his world, whether she wanted to be or not. The cage door had just locked behind her, and Claire was beginning to realize that escape might not be possible, even if she wanted it. The dinner passed in a blur of forced smiles and careful conversation, each course more elaborate than the last, each guest more dangerous than they appeared. Claire played her part perfectly, charming when required, silent when appropriate, and always aware of Nikolai's presence beside her, like a shadow she couldn't shake. Dominic Rousseau had indeed been sensitive about his ex-wives, though Claire only discovered this when his current companion, a woman young enough to be his granddaughter, made a joke about his alimony payments. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees, and Nikolai smoothly redirected the conversation to shipping routes and import tariffs, subjects that apparently didn't involve failed marriages or wounded egos. Alexandra Chen had brought Valentino, who sat in her lap throughout the meal like a furry dictator, and Claire had wisely kept her hands to herself despite the dog's admittedly adorable face. The woman had watched Claire with the kind of sharp intelligence that made her feel like a specimen under a microscope, analyzing every word, every gesture, every breath. "So tell me, dear," Alexandra had said during the main course, her accent crisp and British educated. "How did you and Nikolai meet? He's been quite secretive about you." Claire felt Nikolai's hand find hers under the table, a gentle pressure that could have been reassurance or warning. "At a charity event," Claire said smoothly, the lie tasting like ash on her tongue. "We started talking, and he was kind enough to ask me to dinner." "How romantic," Alexandra said, though her smile suggested she didn't believe a word of it. "And what is it you do when you're not accompanying Nikolai to tedious business dinners?" "I'm in transition at the moment, exploring my options." "How wonderfully vague." The dog yapped, and Alexandra fed it a piece of filet mignon. Nikolai does love his mysteries. The rest of the dinner continued in that vein, polite questions with sharp edges, compliments that felt like threats, laughter that never quite reached anyone's eyes. By the time dessert arrived, Claire's face hurt from smiling, and her feet were screaming in the designer heels. But she'd survived. More than that, she'd succeeded. She could see it in the way the other guests had slowly warmed to her, in the approving nods exchanged across the table, in the way Nikolai's hand had stayed in hers long after Alexandra's questioning had ended. When they finally left the restaurant, stepping into the cool night air where Marcus waited with the car, Claire felt like she could breathe for the first time in hours. "You did well," Nikolai said once they were alone in the back seat. "I feel like I just took a final exam in a subject I never studied." "You passed with distinction. Alexandra liked you. That's rare." "She interrogated me like a hostile witness. That's how she shows affection." Nikolai loosened his tie, the first casual gesture she'd seen from him all evening. "Dominic will probably try to poach you for his own events. Don't accept without telling me first." "I'm not some party favor you loan out to your associates. No, you're mine. But in this world, showing up at someone else's event is a statement of alliance. I need to control those statements." Claire turned to look at him, really look at him in the dim light of the car. His face was shadowed, all sharp angles and harder edges. But there was something in his expression that looked almost like pride. "Why does their approval matter to you?" she asked. "Because disapproval in my world comes with consequences. If they think you're a weakness, they'll exploit it. If they think you're an asset, they'll try to turn you. But if they think you're untouchable, If they believe hurting you means signing their own death warrant, then you're safe. That's a lot of pressure to put on one dinner. Welcome to my life. They drove in silence for a while, the city lights streaming past the windows like falling stars. Claire kicked off the heels, not caring if it was ungraceful, and felt immediate relief in her abused feet. I need to know something, she said finally. That man at the nightclub, the one whose blood was on your cufflinks. Did you kill him? Nikolai didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was careful, measured. Does it matter? Yes. Why? Because I need to know who I'm living with, what I'm part of. He turned to face her fully, his gray eyes unreadable in the darkness. I told you he was selling drugs to children. I told you he'd been warned. What I didn't tell you was that one of those children was 12 years old, and he died from an overdose of something that should never have been in a middle school. Claire's breath caught. That's horrible. Yes, it was. And the man responsible knew the risks, knew the consequences, and did it anyway because he thought he was untouchable. Nikolai's jaw tightened. I made sure he understood he wasn't. So you did kill him. I made sure the problem was permanently solved. How I solved it isn't something you need to know. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're going to get. His tone left no room for argument. There are parts of my life you don't need to be exposed to, Claire. Darkness you don't need to touch. Let me keep those separate from you. I'm already part of your world. You made sure of that. You're part of one aspect of my world. The dinners, the public appearances, the legitimate face of what I do. But the other parts, the violence, the decisions that keep me awake at night, the bodies that don't get found, those aren't yours to carry. Claire wanted to push, wanted to demand the truth, but something in his expression stopped her. He looked tired suddenly, older than his years, like carrying the weight of his empire had cost him pieces of himself he could never get back. I don't know how to reconcile this, she said quietly. The man who saved my mother with the man who kills people. Then don't. Keep them separate in your mind. It's what I do. The car pulled up to the penthouse, and Marcus opened the door with his usual efficiency. Claire stepped out onto the marble pavers, the blue dress swishing around her ankles, and felt the weight of the evening settle over her shoulders. Inside the penthouse, Nikolai poured himself a drink. Whiskey, always whiskey, and stood by the windows overlooking the city he controlled through fear and careful calculation. Thank you, he said without turning around. For tonight. For not running when Alexandra started circling like a shark. For playing the part I needed you to play. It wasn't playing, Claire said, surprising herself. I mean, the lies were lies, but being there with you, standing beside you, that part felt real. He turned then, and there was something vulnerable in his expression that she'd never seen before. Did it? I don't know what that means for me or for us or for whatever this arrangement is becoming, but yeah, it felt real. Nikolai crossed the room in 3 strides, and suddenly he was standing close enough that she could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes, could smell his cologne mixed with something earthier, could feel the heat radiating from his body. Claire, he said, her name barely a whisper. If I kiss you right now, is it because I want to or because you think you owe me? Her heart was hammering against her ribs. I don't know. Then we wait until you do know. He stepped back, putting careful distance between them. Go to bed. Tomorrow we're leaving the city for a few days. Leaving? Where? I have a house in the mountains, private, secure, away from everything. Some business associates are becoming problems, and I need to handle it somewhere they can't follow. And you're taking me with you? I'm not leaving you here alone. Not when people are starting to ask questions about who you are and what you mean to me. He finished his whiskey in one swallow. Pack light. We leave at dawn. Claire wanted to argue, wanted to demand more explanation, but the look on his face told her this wasn't a negotiation. So she retreated to her bedroom, closed the door, and tried to process everything that had happened in the span of a few hours. She'd survived her first test in Nikolai's world. She'd earned the approval of dangerous people who smiled while plotting destruction. And she'd almost kissed a man who might be a monster or might be something far more complicated than she'd ever imagined. Sleep came slowly, troubled by dreams of blood and diamonds, of cages made of gold, of a man with winter eyes who looked at her like she was the only real thing in his carefully constructed world. When dawn broke, she was already awake, already packed, already standing by the windows watching the sun rise over a city that belonged to someone else. The drive to the mountains took 3 hours, winding through countryside that gradually transformed from suburbs to forest to something wild and untouched. Marcus drove while Nikolai worked on his tablet, making calls in languages Claire didn't recognize, and sending emails with the kind of clinical efficiency that suggested lives hung in the balance of his decisions. "Where exactly are we going?" Claire asked when they'd been driving for over an hour. "Somewhere safe," Nikolai said, without looking up from his screen. "That's not an answer. It's the only one you need right now." They fell back into silence, and Claire watched the trees blur past her window. She'd left a message for her mother's nurses, explaining she'd be out of town for a few days, but would call to check in. Her mother had been sleeping more lately, the treatments taking their toll even as they fought to save her life. And part of Claire was grateful she wouldn't have to lie to her face about where she was going or why. The house, when they finally arrived, wasn't a house at all. It was a fortress disguised as a mountain estate. High walls, security cameras, gates that required codes and facial recognition, and grounds that stretched for what looked like miles in every direction. The main building was all stone and timber, designed to look rustic while probably containing enough technology to launch a satellite. "This is where you come to handle problems?" Claire asked as they pulled through the final security checkpoint. "This is where I come to think," Nikolai corrected. "And yes, sometimes thinking involves handling problems." Inside, the estate was surprisingly warm. All hardwood floors and massive fireplaces, leather furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered views of mountains that seemed to touch the sky. Staff appeared from nowhere to take their bags, disappearing as quickly as they'd come, and Claire found herself standing in a great room that looked like something from a magazine spread about billionaire retreats. "Your room is upstairs, second door on the left," Nikolai said, already moving toward what looked like an office. "Make yourself comfortable. Lunch will be served at 1. "Are you going to tell me what we're actually doing here?" He paused, turning back to face her. "I'm keeping you safe while I deal with a situation that could become dangerous. That's all you need to know. Stop treating me like a child who can't handle the truth. I'm treating you like someone I don't want to traumatize with the realities of my business." His voice was sharp now, the warmth from last night completely gone. "You wanted to be part of this world, Claire. This is what it looks like. Me making decisions you don't get to question and keeping you away from consequences you don't need to witness. I didn't want to be part of this world. You forced me into it. And yet here you are wearing designer clothes and living in luxury while your mother gets the best care money can buy. Forgive me if I don't feel guilty about the force I applied." Claire felt tears sting her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You're an asshole." "Yes," Nikolai said simply. "But I'm an asshole who keeps his promises. Your mother is alive because of me. You're safe because of me. Remember that before you decide I'm the villain in your story." He disappeared into the office, the door closing with a finality that felt like punctuation on an argument Claire couldn't win. She stood there for a long moment, fury and frustration warring with something uncomfortably close to understanding. He was right, damn him. Everything he'd said was true. Her mother was alive because of him. She was safe because of him. And maybe that made him a villain, but it also made him the only reason she had anything left to fight for. Claire found her room, which was less a room and more a suite that could have housed a family, and unpacked the few things she'd brought. Through the windows, she could see mountains stretching endlessly in every direction, beautiful and isolating in equal measure. She was trapped here, in this beautiful prison, with a man who saved lives and took them with equal efficiency. And the worst part was, she was starting to understand why. Sin. Lunch was a silent affair, served by staff who appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Nikolai ate with the same precise movements he applied to everything else, his attention divided between his food and his phone, which buzzed constantly with messages that made his expression progressively darker. "Is everything okay?" Claire asked finally, unable to take the silence anymore. "Define okay. Are we in danger?" "Not immediate danger, no." "That's not reassuring." Nikolai set down his fork, giving her his full attention for the first time since they'd arrived. "There's a man named Victor Kane. He runs operations on the south side, and he's been making moves into my territory. Normally, this would be handled through negotiations, agreements about boundaries, and profit sharing, but Victor doesn't negotiate, he takes. So what are you going to do? Make it clear that taking from me comes with consequences he's not prepared to face. You're going to kill him. I'm going to give him a choice. Stop or face the consequences of continuing. Nikolai's eyes were hard, all the almost warmth from the night before completely erased. What he does with that choice is up to him. And if he chooses wrong, then I make sure no one else makes the same mistake. Claire set down her own fork, her appetite gone. How do you live like this? How do you make these decisions and still sleep at night? I sleep fine, knowing that every decision I make keeps my empire running and my people safe. The alternative is showing weakness, and weakness in my world is a death sentence. He stood up, leaving his plate half finished. I have calls to make. Stay in the house. The grounds are monitored, but I'd prefer you didn't test the security systems. I'm not a prisoner. No. You're someone I'm trying to keep alive. There's a difference. He left her there in the dining room, and Claire felt the weight of isolation settle over her like a heavy blanket. She was alone in a fortress in the mountains with a man who killed people as casually as he ordered lunch, and somehow she was supposed to reconcile that with the man who'd saved her mother, who'd held her hand during dinner, who'd asked permission before kissing her. She spent the afternoon exploring the estate, finding a library filled with books in a dozen languages, a gym that looked like it belonged in a professional training facility, and a music room with a grand piano that probably cost more than her old apartment building. Every room was beautiful and empty, designed for a life she couldn't begin to understand. As the sun started to set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Claire found herself drawn to the windows in the great room. The view was breathtaking, the kind of beauty that made you believe the world was clean and simple instead of complicated and stained with blood. She didn't hear Nikolai approach until he was standing beside her, 2 glasses of wine in his hands. "Peace offering," he said, holding one out to her. Claire took it, surprised by the gesture. "For what?" "For being an asshole earlier. You were right to ask questions. I'm not used to having to explain myself." "I noticed." They stood there in silence, watching the sun paint the sky in impossible colors. Claire sipped her wine, something red and expensive that probably had a name she couldn't pronounce, and tried to find words for the thoughts tangling in her mind. "I don't know how to be around you," she said finally. "One minute you're kind and almost human, and the next you're talking about killing people like it's just another item on your to-do list. I can't reconcile those 2 versions of you." "Then don't," Nikolai said quietly. "They're both true. I'm capable of kindness, and I'm capable of violence. Most people are if you push them hard enough. I'm just more honest about it than most. That's not comforting. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be true." He turned to face her, and in the dying light his eyes looked more silver than gray. "I'm not a good man, Claire. I've done things that would make you run screaming if you knew the details. But I'm also not a monster. I protect what's mine. I keep my word. And I don't hurt people who don't deserve it." "Who decides what they deserve?" "I do. Because in my world, I'm the one with the power to make that decision." He paused. "I know that terrifies you. It should. But it's also the reason you're safe. The reason your mother is alive. The reason people at that dinner smiled at you instead of seeing you as prey." Claire wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that power built on fear and blood wasn't real power at all. But looking at him in the fading light, seeing the weight he carried in the set of his shoulders and the lines around his eyes, she understood something she hadn't before. He was as much a prisoner of his world as she was. The difference was, he'd built his own cage. "What happens after this?" she asked. "After you handle Victor Kane and whatever other problems are threatening your empire? What happens to me?" "That depends on you." "How?" "Do you want to leave?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Claire thought about her old apartment, her 3 jobs, her life of constant exhaustion and fear. She thought about her mother sleeping peacefully in a hospital bed that actually cared about her comfort. She thought about dinners with dangerous people and dresses that cost more than a month's rent, and a man who looked at her like she was something rare and worth protecting. "I don't know," she admitted. "Then we keep going until you do know." Nikolai finished his wine, setting the glass down on the nearest table. "I meant what I said, Claire. You're not a prisoner here, but you're also not free to walk away without understanding the consequences. Not because I'll hurt you, but because the world I've brought you into doesn't forget. People will remember your face, your name, your connection to me. That doesn't go away just because you want it to. So I'm trapped either way. You're safe either way. There's a difference. Before Claire could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and something in his expression changed, going from almost human to completely cold in the span of a heartbeat. I need to take this, he said, already moving toward his office. Don't wait up. This is going to take a while. He disappeared, and Claire was alone again with her wine and her thoughts, and the mountains turning dark beyond the windows. She went to bed eventually, lying awake in the enormous bed and listening to the sounds of the house settling around her. Sometime after midnight, she heard raised voices from downstairs, Nikolai's controlled fury and someone else's defensive responses. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear enough. Something had gone wrong. Morning brought clarity in the worst possible way. Claire woke to shouting from somewhere downstairs, urgent and angry, and the sound of cars arriving at speed. She threw on clothes and rushed to the top of the stairs, her heart hammering. The great room below had been transformed into a command center. Men in dark suits, clearly security, clearly armed, stood at every entrance. Nikolai was in the center of it all, his phone pressed to his ear, his free hand gesturing sharply as he gave orders in a voice that could cut glass. I don't care what he thinks he's entitled to, Nikolai was saying. If Victor Kane wants war, we'll give him war. But it ends today. Claire started down the stairs, and every security guard's hand moved toward their weapons. Nikolai looked up, saw her, and his expression flickered from fury to something like concern. Get her back upstairs, he ordered. Two guards moved toward her, and Claire held up her hands. I'm going. Claire, wait! Nikolai crossed the room in quick strides, catching her before she could retreat. I need you to stay in your room until this is handled. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except me. What's happening? Victor made his choice, the wrong one. His grip on her arm was gentle despite the tension in his voice. I'm handling it, but it's going to get messy. I don't want you anywhere near this. You're scaring me. Good. Be scared. It'll keep you cautious. He released her arm, already turning back to his men. Marcus will be stationed outside your door. If anything happens, if anyone gets past our security, you do exactly what he says. Understand? Claire nodded, too frightened to argue. She retreated to her room and locked the door as instructed, her hands shaking as she turned the deadbolt. Through the windows, she could see more vehicles arriving, more men in suits, the estate transforming from a peaceful retreat into something that looked distinctly like a military operation. Marcus appeared outside her door within minutes, his expression professionally blank. Miss Morrison, I'm going to need you to stay away from the windows and keep this door locked. Mr. Soren's orders. What's going on? He's handling a situation, that's all you need to know. The morning stretched into afternoon, and Claire paced her room like a caged animal, unable to see anything but the mountains beyond her windows, and unable to hear anything but the occasional shout from downstairs. Her phone was useless, no signal this far into the mountains, and the isolation felt suffocating. Around 3 o'clock she heard gunshots. The sound was unmistakable, sharp cracks that echoed off the mountains, and Claire's blood turned to ice. More shots followed, a rapid succession that sounded like it was coming from somewhere on the grounds, and then silence so complete it was worse than the noise. She pressed herself against the wall beside the door, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Marcus? She called out, her voice trembling. Stay in there, Miss Morrison. Don't open this door. More silence. More waiting. More fear crawling up her spine like spiders. And then finally footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, measured, approaching her door. Claire, Nikolai's voice rough and tired. It's me. Open the door. She fumbled with the lock, her hand shaking so badly it took 3 tries. When the door finally opened, Nikolai stood there looking like he'd walked through hell. His shirt was untucked, his hair disheveled, and there was blood on his hands. Not the neat stains on cufflinks this time, but actual blood, fresh and red. Are you hurt? Claire asked, reaching for him instinctively. It's not mine. He stepped into the room and Marcus closed the door behind him. Victor Kane is dead. His men are either dead or running. The problem is handled. You killed him. Yes. Here, on the grounds, in the woods, about a mile from the house. He came with a team thinking he could intimidate me into surrendering territory. He was wrong. Nikolai moved to her bathroom, turning on the sink and washing his hands with methodical precision. I gave him a choice, Claire. He chose violence. I simply finished what he started. Claire watched the water run red, then pink, then clear, and felt something inside her break and reform into a shape she didn't recognize. This was who Nikolai Sorin really was. Not the man who held her hand at dinners or asked permission before kissing her. This was the empire builder, the crime lord, the man who killed without hesitation when his power was threatened. And she was living in his house, eating his food, wearing his clothes, tied to him in ways she couldn't escape. "I want to leave," she whispered. Nikolai dried his hands, his movement slow and deliberate. "No, you don't. You just killed someone. I killed someone who was trying to kill me. If you're expecting an apology, you won't get one. I'm not asking for an apology. I'm asking to go home." "You don't have a home anymore, Claire. You have this. You have me. And until you understand that leaving means putting yourself and your mother in danger from every person who sees you as a way to hurt me, you're staying right here." He crossed to where she stood, and there was blood still under his fingernails despite the washing. He was dangerous and deadly and completely unrepentant about the violence he'd just committed. He was also the only thing standing between her and a world that would devour her whole. "I hate you," Claire said, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I know." Nikolai's voice was soft, almost gentle. "But you're also starting to understand why I do what I do, why the violence is necessary, why fear is the only language some people understand." "That doesn't make it right." "No," he agreed, "but it makes it survival." He left her there, closing the door quietly behind him, and Claire sank down onto the bed with her hands over her face. She cried for the girl she'd been 3 days ago, for the life she'd lost, for the innocence that was bleeding away with every moment she spent in Nikolai's world. But she didn't pack. She didn't run. She didn't even unlock the door. Because he was right, damn him. She was starting to understand. And that terrified her more than anything else. The estate fell silent after the violence, a quiet so profound it felt like the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Claire stayed in her room for hours, watching the sun track across the sky and listening to the sounds of cleanup happening somewhere beyond her windows. Vehicles coming and going, low voices issuing orders, the machinery of Nikolai's empire erasing evidence of what had happened in those woods. She should have been horrified. She should have been planning her escape, figuring out how to get away from a man who killed people and washed their blood off his hands like it was just another part of his day. Instead, she found herself thinking about the choice Nikolai had mentioned, the one Victor Kane had made, the wrong one. Around sunset, there was a soft knock on her door. "Miss Morrison?" It was Marcus, his voice carefully neutral. "Mr. Sorin would like to speak with you. In the library, when you're ready." Claire looked at herself in the bathroom mirror, eyes red from crying, hair disheveled, still wearing the clothes she'd thrown on that morning in a panic. She looked like someone who'd survived something, though she wasn't entirely sure what. "Tell him I'll be down in 10 minutes, she said. She washed her face, changed into clean clothes, and tried to find some semblance of composure. When she finally made her way downstairs, the great room had been returned to its previous state. No guards, no weapons, no signs of the chaos from earlier. Just expensive furniture and mountain views and the illusion of peace. The library was at the far end of the house, a room she'd discovered during yesterday's exploration. Floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with books in more languages than she could identify, leather chairs positioned near a fireplace that was now burning low, and windows that looked out over the darkening forest. Nikolai sat in one of the chairs, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring into the flames like they might hold answers to questions he hadn't asked yet. He'd changed clothes, no more blood, no more evidence, and looked almost human again in dark jeans and a simple black sweater. "You came?" he said without looking up. "You asked me to." Claire stayed near the doorway, maintaining distance. Or was it an order? "It was a request. You're free to refuse." "Am I?" She moved into the room slowly, like approaching a wounded animal that might still bite. Because earlier you made it pretty clear I don't get to leave. I said leaving has consequences. That's different from saying you're not allowed to choose. He finally looked at her, and there was something raw in his expression that made her chest tighten. Sit down, Claire. Please. She sat in the chair across from him, keeping the fire between them like a barrier. The warmth felt good after hours of pacing her cold room, but it did nothing to thaw the ice that had settled in her veins. I owe you an explanation, Nikolai said quietly. You don't owe me anything. This is your world. I'm just living in it. That's not true, and we both know it. He set down his glass with careful precision. You're not just living in my world, Claire. You're part of it now. That means you deserve to understand what you're part of. I understand perfectly. You're a criminal who kills people when they threaten your business. What else is there to know? Why I became this, why I stay this, and why, despite everything you saw today, I'm still trying to be something better than what I started as. Claire wanted to dismiss his words, wanted to hold on to her anger and fear like armor, but there was something in his voice, a vulnerability she'd never heard before, that made her listen. Victor Kane wasn't just a competitor, Nikolai began, his eyes fixed on the fire. 20 years ago, before I built any of this, I was nobody. A kid from the wrong side of town with nothing but anger and ambition. Victor was my mentor. He taught me the business, showed me how to navigate this world, and I trusted him the way you trust someone who saves your life. What happened? He decided I was getting too successful, too independent, so he tried to have me killed. Nikolai's voice was flat, emotionless. Sent 3 men to my apartment. I was 22 years old, barely making enough to eat, and suddenly I was fighting for my life against people I'd considered allies. Claire felt her throat tighten. How did you survive? I was meaner than they expected, faster, more willing to do whatever it took. He picked up his glass again, swirling the amber liquid. I killed 2 of them. The 3rd one ran. And Victor disappeared, taking his operation south, building a new empire while I built mine. For 20 years, we stayed out of each other's way, an unspoken truce based on mutual fear. Until he came back. Until he decided to test me again, to see if I'd gone soft, if I'd lost the edge that kept me alive all those years ago. Nikolai's jaw tightened. He brought men to my home, Claire, not to negotiate or intimidate, to kill. He made his choice, and I responded the only way that ensures no one else makes the same mistake. By killing him. By proving that some lines don't get crossed without consequences. He turned to face her fully. I'm not asking you to approve. I'm not even asking you to understand. I'm just telling you the truth because you deserve that much. Claire sat with his words, feeling them settle over her like snow. This was the man she was tied to, someone who'd been forged in violence, who'd survived by being harder and colder than everyone around him, who'd built an empire on the bodies of people who'd underestimated him. But he was also the man who'd saved her mother, who'd held her hand at dinner, who'd asked permission before kissing her. I don't know what to do with this information, she said finally. You don't have to do anything with it. Just know that when I say I'll keep you safe, I mean it, because I know what it's like to be vulnerable in this world, and I won't let that happen to you. Even though I'm just part of a transaction, even though you bought me? Nikolai stood up, crossing to the windows where darkness had swallowed the forest beyond. You stopped being just a transaction the moment you called me a bad boy and looked at me like I was human. Everything after that has been me trying to figure out what to do with someone who sees me instead of just what I can do for them. I still see what you can do, Claire said. I saw it today. Yes, you did, and you're still here. He turned back to face her. Why? Because I don't know where else to go. Because my mother needs the care you're providing. Because I'm trapped in this situation, whether I like it or not. Those are reasons you stay. They're not reasons you came downstairs tonight when you could have hidden in your room and avoided this conversation entirely. Claire stood up, moving to the fireplace where flames cast dancing shadows across the stone. I came down because I wanted to understand. Because hating you is exhausting, and I need to know if there's something else I should be feeling instead. And what do you feel? She turned to face him, and the distance between them suddenly felt both too far and not far enough. Confused. Scared. Angry at myself for not being more angry at you, and something else I don't have a name for yet. Nikolai moved closer, and Claire could see the firelight reflected in his gray eyes, turning them to molten silver. I'm going to give you something no one in my world ever gets. What's that? A genuine choice. No manipulation, no coercion, no threats. He stopped just outside arm's reach. Tomorrow morning, I'll have Marcus drive you back to the city. You can go back to your apartment, which I'll continue paying for. Your mother's care continues, fully funded, no strings attached. Your debts are erased. You'll have enough money in an account to live comfortably while you figure out what you want to do next. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs. What's the catch? No catch. You walk away, and this arrangement ends. You're free. You said leaving has consequences. The consequence is that you leave. That's all. No retaliation, no punishment, no taking away your mother's care. His voice softened. I told you from the beginning that I wanted you to choose me. Not because you were trapped, but because you wanted to. This is that choice, Claire. Make it freely. And if I stay? If you stay, then this stops being a transaction and starts being something real. You stop being someone I protect out of obligation and start being someone I protect because I want to. The doors unlock. The guards disappear from outside your bedroom. You have freedom within this world, not just the illusion of it. Why? Claire whispered. Why give me this choice now? Because you saw the worst of me today, and you're still standing here asking questions instead of running. Because I'm tired of wondering if you're here out of fear or something else. And because I need to know if what I feel when I look at you is real or just another manipulation I'm running on myself. Claire felt tears prick her eyes. What do you feel when you look at me? Nikolai reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. His palms were warm, gentle, completely at odds with the violence they'd committed hours earlier. Like I'm human again, he said quietly. Like all the walls I built to survive might actually be a prison instead of protection. Like maybe there's something worth being besides dangerous. I don't know if I can give you that. I'm not asking you to give me anything. I'm asking you to choose, stay or go, be free or be mine. But make it a real choice, not one forced by circumstances or debt or fear. He dropped his hands and stepped back, and Claire felt the absence of his touch like a physical ache. You have until tomorrow morning, he said. Marcus will be ready to drive you whenever you want to leave. If you're still here at noon, I'll know you've made your choice. He walked past her, pausing at the library door. For what it's worth, Claire, I hope you stay. But I hope you stay because you want to, not because you think you have to. Then he was gone, and Claire was alone with the fire and her thoughts and the weight of a choice that would define the rest of her life. Bipko? She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she paced her unlocked room. Nikolai had been true to his word about that, at least, and wrestled with the decision that seemed impossible from every angle. Leaving meant freedom, meant going back to a life where she wasn't tied to a criminal, where she didn't have to watch violence happen and pretend it was normal, where she could look at herself in the mirror without wondering who she was becoming. But leaving also meant loneliness, meant going back to an empty apartment and a life that felt hollow now that she'd seen what else was possible. Meant never knowing if the connection she felt with Nikolai was real or just Stockholm Syndrome dressed up as something more meaningful. Staying meant accepting that she was part of his world, meant acknowledging that the violence and danger were package deals with the safety and security, meant admitting that somewhere along the way she'd stopped seeing him as just a monster and started seeing him as a man, flawed and dangerous, and capable of both tenderness and brutality. Staying meant choosing him. Actually choosing him, not just accepting the circumstances he'd created. Around dawn, Claire found herself in the library again, curled up in the same chair where Nikolai had sat the night before. The fire had burned down to embers, and the first light of morning was turning the mountains from black to gray to gold. She heard footsteps and knew without looking that it was him. Couldn't sleep? Nikolai asked, settling into the chair across from her. Too much to think about. Have you made your decision? Claire looked at him in the growing light. This man who'd upended her life, who'd saved her mother, who'd killed people and washed their blood away like it was nothing. He looked tired, older than his years, and there was something vulnerable in the way he was watching her that made her chest ache. "I have conditions," she said. Something flickered in his eyes. Hope, maybe, or relief. "Name them." "First, no more lies. If I ask you a question about your business, about what you do, you answer honestly. I don't need every detail, but I need the truth." "Agreed." "Second, my mother never knows the real nature of our arrangement. As far as she's concerned, we met normally and fell for each other normally." "Already agreed to that, but yes." "Third, I want to do something meaningful. I can't just be arm candy at dinners and a pretty face in your penthouse. I need purpose." Nikolai leaned forward. "What did you have in mind?" "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out, and when I do, you support it." "As long as it doesn't put you in danger, agreed." "Fourth," Claire said, her voice steadier now, "the bedroom door stays unlocked, but you don't come through it unless I invite you. Whatever this becomes between us, it happens at my pace, on my terms." "Agreed." His voice was rough. "Anything else?" "Yeah, if I decide I need to leave, if this becomes too much or I can't handle it anymore, you let me go. No arguments, no consequences, no taking away my mother's care. You just let me go." Nikolai was quiet for a long moment, and Claire could see him weighing the request against whatever calculations ran through his mind when he made decisions that affected his empire. "If you decide to leave," he said finally, "I'll let you go. Your mother's care continues. You'll have financial security, and I won't come after you." He paused. "But I can't guarantee that other people in my world won't see you as a loose end or a vulnerability. That's not a threat. It's reality. Once you're part of this world, completely extracting yourself is nearly impossible. Then I'll have to trust you to keep me safe even after I leave. You will be safe. You have my word." Claire stood up, moving to the windows where morning light was flooding the mountains with gold. She could see for miles from here, endless forest and sky and freedom that wasn't really freedom at all. "I'm staying," she said quietly. She heard him stand, felt him move to stand beside her. "Why?" he asked. Claire turned to face him, and for the first time since she'd stumbled into that private lounge drunk and reckless, she felt like she was making a choice that was entirely her own. "Because I'm tired of running from things. Because my mother is alive and comfortable, and that matters more than my pride. Because you gave me a real choice, and that means something." She paused, searching for the right words. "And because when you asked if you could kiss me, you waited for an answer, because you're trying to be something better than what you started as. Because I think maybe we both deserve a chance to figure out who we are when we're not just surviving." "Claire, I'm not saying I love you. I'm not even saying I like you most of the time, but I'm saying I choose this. I choose to stay and see what this becomes when it's not just a transaction." Nikolai reached out, and this time, when he cupped her face in his hands, she leaned into the touch instead of pulling away. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For choosing. For staying. For seeing me as someone worth taking a chance on. Don't make me regret it. I'll spend every day trying not to." He kissed her then, and it was nothing like Claire had imagined. It wasn't forceful or demanding or taking something she hadn't offered. It was gentle, questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't pull away. Instead, she kissed him back and tasted possibility and danger and something that might become love if they were both brave enough to let it. When they finally broke apart, the sun had fully risen, flooding the library with light that made everything look clean and new. "So what happens now?" Claire asked. "Now we go back to the city? Now I introduce you to people not as someone under my protection, but as someone who chose to be with me. Now we figure out what this looks like when it's real. And the violence? The danger? Still part of my world. Still something I have to navigate." Nikolai's hands dropped to her shoulders. "But I'll keep you as separate from it as I can. You wanted truth. And here it is. I can't promise you a normal life. I can't promise you safety from everything. But I can promise you honesty, respect, and every piece of protection I'm capable of providing. That's not much of a fairy tale." "No," he agreed, "but it's real. And real is what you asked for." Claire thought about her mother, sleeping peacefully in a hospital bed that didn't feel like punishment. She thought about the girl she'd been a week ago, exhausted and desperate and drowning in circumstances she couldn't control. She thought about the woman she was becoming, someone who'd looked at a monster and seen a man, someone who'd been given a cage and chosen to unlock it from the inside. "Real is good," she said finally. "Real is enough." They stood there in the library as morning turned to midday, making plans for a life that would be complicated and dangerous and nothing like either of them had expected. Marcus was sent to pack their things. Calls were made to the city, arrangements put in place for their return, and at noon exactly, when Claire should have been in a car driving away from everything Nikolai represented, she was instead sitting beside him on the drive back to the penthouse, her hand in his, feeling more free than she'd felt in years. The cage door was open. She could leave any time she wanted. But for the first time in her life, Claire Morrison was exactly where she chose to be. The return to the city felt different. The penthouse that had seemed like a prison now felt like possibility. The guards that had felt like wardens now felt like protection. And Nikolai, who had terrified her with his violence and control, now felt like someone she was beginning to understand. The first week back, he kept his promises. The bedroom door stayed unlocked, and he never entered without invitation. He answered her questions about his business with brutal honesty. Yes, he controlled distribution networks. Yes, he had people who handled enforcement. Yes, violence was sometimes necessary to maintain order in a world built on fear. But he also showed her other sides of his empire, the legitimate businesses he'd built as fronts that had become profitable in their own right. The community programs he funded anonymously, youth centers, addiction treatment facilities, programs to keep kids out of the life he'd been forced into. "It's not redemption," he said when she asked about it. "It's just trying to make sure fewer people end up like I did." Claire visited her mother every other day, and the change was remarkable. Margaret was gaining weight, smiling more, talking about the future in ways she hadn't in years. The doctors were cautiously optimistic about a new treatment protocol, and while they couldn't promise a cure, they could promise time, months, maybe even years instead of weeks. "You look different," her mother said one afternoon, studying Claire's face. "Happy. Is it the new job?" "It's a lot of things, Mom." "Tell me about this family you work for, the mysterious ones you won't give me details about." Claire smiled, the lie feeling less heavy than it once had. "They're complicated, demanding, a little dangerous if I'm being honest." "But you like them?" "I'm starting to." Her mother reached out, taking Claire's hand. "All I want is for you to be happy, sweetheart. If this job makes you happy, then I'm glad you found it." If she only knew, Claire thought, but some truths were better kept hidden, wrapped in comfortable lies that protected the people you loved. At night, Claire would sit on the terrace of the penthouse, looking out over the city that Nikolai controlled through invisible threads of power and fear. He would join her sometimes, bringing wine or coffee, sitting in comfortable silence or talking about everything and nothing. "What did you want to be?" she asked him one evening. "Before all this, when you were young and still had choices." Nikolai was quiet for a long moment. "An architect. I wanted to build things instead of destroy them." "You still build things, just different kinds of structures. Empires instead of buildings, fears instead of foundations." He looked at her. "What about you? You said you wanted to be a teacher." "I still do in some ways. I want to help people. I'm just not sure how to do that in your world." "Then we'll figure it out together." And slowly, carefully, they did. Claire started volunteering at one of the youth centers Nikolai funded, tutoring kids who reminded her of what she'd almost become. Desperate, forgotten, falling through cracks that society pretended didn't exist. Nikolai never questioned it, never tried to control it, just made sure Marcus drove her there and back safely. "You're good at this," Marcus commented one afternoon, watching her work with a teenager struggling through algebra. "It feels good to be good at something again." The dinners continued, more business associates, more careful social navigation, more performances where Claire played the role of devoted companion to a dangerous man. But now it felt less like acting and more like truth. She was devoted, in her own complicated way, to this man who'd saved her mother and given her choices, and was trying to be better than his circumstances had made him. Alexandra Chen invited them to a gallery opening, and Claire found herself actually enjoying the evening, talking about art with people who appreciated beauty, even if they created ugliness in their professional lives. You've changed him, Alexandra said quietly, watching Nikolai across the room. He smiles now. Actually smiles, not just that cold thing he does when he's pretending to be human. I think he's just letting himself be who he actually is instead of who he has to be. Same thing, dear, same thing. Alexandra's dog yapped from her designer purse. Take care of him. Men like Nikolai don't let people in often. When they do, it's total, absolute, terrifying in its completeness. Is that a warning? It's an observation. What you do with it is up to you. That night, back at the penthouse, Claire found Nikolai in his office, reviewing contracts or shipment manifests or whatever paperwork crime lords dealt with when they weren't actively committing crimes. Can I come in? She asked from the doorway. He looked up, and that smile Alexandra had mentioned appeared, genuine and warm and just for her. Always. Claire crossed to his desk, hip perching on the edge. I've been thinking. Dangerous pastime. I want to expand the tutoring program, hire more teachers, reach more kids, make a real difference instead of just helping one student at a time. Done. Tell me what you need, and I'll make it happen. Just like that? You said you needed purpose. This is your purpose. Why would I stand in the way of that? Nikolai set down his pen. Besides, every kid we keep out of this life is one less person I have to worry about becoming the next Victor Kane. Practical and altruistic. I'm impressed. I have my moments. He pulled her closer and she went willingly, settling into his lap like it was the most natural thing in the world. Are you happy, Claire? She thought about the question, really thought about it. A month ago, she would have said happiness was an impossible luxury. 2 weeks ago, she would have said she was trapped. A week ago, she would have said she was choosing to stay but didn't know if it would ever feel right. Now? I'm getting there, she said honestly. This isn't the life I imagined for myself, but it's becoming a life I can live with, a life I'm building on my own terms, even within your world. That's all I want, for you to build something here that's yours. Claire kissed him then, and it was easier than it had been in the library, more natural than it had been when they'd returned to the city. It was becoming familiar, this closeness with a man who was equal parts danger and devotion. Stay with me tonight, he said against her lips, not because you feel obligated, just because you want to. In your room? In my room? In my bed? Just sleeping, if that's all you want, but I'm tired of being alone, and I think you might be too. Claire pulled back to look at him, really look at him. This man who'd killed people today and was asking her to sleep beside him like it was the most innocent request in the world. This man who'd built an empire on blood, but was trying to build something better with her. Okay, she whispered. But if you snore, I'm going back to my room. Deal. They fell asleep that night wrapped around each other, and for the first time since her mother got sick, since her life fell apart, since she stumbled drunk into a world she didn't understand, Claire felt safe. Not because she was protected, not because she was trapped, but because she'd chosen this, chosen him, chosen to build something real from the wreckage of impossible circumstances. The cage door was open. She could leave any time. But she was finally beginning to understand that freedom wasn't about where you were. It was about choosing to be there. 3 months passed in a rhythm that felt almost normal. If normal could include armed guards and business dinners with people who controlled half the city's underground economy. Claire's tutoring program expanded from 1 youth center to 4, reaching kids across 3 districts who needed someone to believe they could be more than their circumstances. Nikolai funded it without question, never asking for recognition or control, just quietly ensuring she had everything she needed to make a difference. Her mother's health had stabilized in ways the doctors called remarkable. The new treatment protocol was working, buying time measured in years instead of months, and Margaret had started talking about things she wanted to do when she got stronger. Travel, maybe, or finally learning to paint like she'd always dreamed. "You've given me my life back," her mother said one afternoon, squeezing Claire's hand with strength that had been absent for so long. "I don't know how you managed all this, but I'm grateful every single day." Claire smiled, swallowing the guilt that came with necessary lies. "I just found the right people to help, Mom, that's all. This family you work for must be very generous. They have their moments." What her mother didn't know, what she could never know, was that the generous family was actually one man who'd killed people and built an empire on fear, and that Claire had stopped being just an employee and started being something far more complicated months ago. She and Nikolai had settled into a relationship that defied easy definition. Some nights they slept in separate rooms, needing space and independence. Other nights they gravitated toward each other like magnets, seeking comfort and closeness and conversation that stretched until dawn. The physical intimacy had grown slowly, carefully, always on Claire's terms, and never rushed despite the desire that simmered between them like a constant current. "I love you," Nikolai said one night, the words quiet in the darkness of his bedroom. Claire went very still. They'd been lying tangled together, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Those 3 words hung in the air like something fragile that might shatter if she breathed wrong. "You don't have to say it back," he continued. "I just needed you to know. You've changed everything for me, Claire. The way I see the world, the way I see myself. I didn't think I was capable of this anymore, but you made me believe I could be someone worth loving." Claire lifted her head to look at him, and in the dim light from the city beyond the windows, his eyes were soft, vulnerable in ways he never showed anyone else. "I'm not there yet," she said honestly, "but I'm getting closer every day." "That's enough. More than enough." She kissed him then, pouring everything she couldn't say into the contact, gratitude and affection, and the beginning of something that might become love if given enough time to grow. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and wanting, she made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Not just sleeping, all of it." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure I want to choose this. Choose you. Choose us." What happened next was tender and intense, and nothing like Claire had imagined it would be with a man like Nikolai. He was careful with her, attentive, making sure every moment was about mutual desire instead of obligation or transaction. And when it was over, when they lay wrapped around each other in the aftermath, Claire felt something shift inside her, a final wall coming down, a last piece of resistance crumbling away. Maybe this was what falling in love felt like when you did it with your eyes wide open, knowing exactly who you were falling for and choosing them anyway. Check. But peace in Nikolai's world was always temporary, and trouble arrived on a Tuesday morning in the form of a phone call that made him go pale. Claire was in the kitchen making coffee when she heard his office door slam open, heard his rapid footsteps approaching. "We need to leave," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Right now." "What's wrong?" "Victor Kane's brother, Daniel. He's been building an operation while staying under the radar, and he just made his move." Nikolai was already pulling out his phone, typing rapid messages. "He has people watching your mother's hospital. He knows about the youth centers. He knows everything, Claire, and he's threatening to hurt the people you care about if I don't surrender territory to him." Claire felt ice flood her veins. "My mother is being moved right now to a secure facility. Marcus is coordinating her transfer with a full security team." His hands were shaking slightly as he gripped his phone. "The kids at the centers are being sent home early with warnings to their families. Everyone you've touched, everyone you care about, is being protected. This is because of me. This is because Daniel Kane wants revenge for his brother and sees you as the easiest way to hurt me." Nikolai crossed to her, gripping her shoulders. "I won't let him touch you. I won't let him touch anyone you love. But I need you to trust me right now and do exactly what I say." "Oh, what are you going to do?" "End this. Permanently." His eyes were hard, all the softness from last night completely erased. "But first I'm getting you somewhere safe." Within 30 minutes, Claire found herself back at the mountain estate, surrounded by more security than she'd seen even during Victor's attack. Nikolai had insisted she bring nothing, that everything she needed was already there, and the urgency in his voice had made her comply without argument. "How long will I be here?" she asked as Marcus stationed himself outside the main entrance. "Until I've handled Daniel Kane and made sure there are no other threats waiting in the shadows." Nikolai cupped her face, and there was something desperate in the gesture. "I'm sorry. I promised you freedom, and now I'm locking you away again. You're keeping me safe. There's a difference." "Is there?" His thumb traced her cheekbone. "Sometimes I can't tell anymore." "Nikolai, whatever you're planning to do, don't ask me about it, please. Let me keep this separate from you." "That's not how this works anymore. We're partners, remember? You promised me honesty." He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were bleak. I'm going to offer Daniel the same choice I gave his brother. Stop this vendetta and walk away, or face the consequences of continuing. And when he chooses wrong, then I make sure no one else in the Kane family decides to test me again. Claire felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. This was the reality of loving a man like Nikolai, knowing that sometimes protection required violence, that sometimes keeping people safe meant becoming the monster everyone feared. Come back to me, she said quietly. Always. He kissed her like it might be the last time, deep and desperate and full of everything he couldn't say. Then he was gone, and Claire was alone in the fortress with her thoughts and her fears and the terrible knowledge that the man she was falling in love with might not survive the night. The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness. Marcus provided updates when he could. Mr. Soren had made contact with Daniel Kane. A meeting was being arranged, security teams were in position. But the details were sparse, carefully edited to protect her from the full reality of what was happening in the city below. Claire tried to distract herself with books from the library, with pacing the great room, with anything that might make time move faster. But all she could think about was Nikolai walking into a confrontation that could end with him dead, and all the things she should have said but hadn't. Around midnight, her phone rang. An unknown number. "Hello?" she answered, her voice trembling. "Miss Morrison?" The voice was unfamiliar, male, with an accent she couldn't place. "My name is Daniel Kane. I believe we have a mutual acquaintance." Claire's blood turned to ice. "How did you get this number?" "I have my ways. I wanted to talk to you before I kill Nikolai Soren. Give you a chance to understand why your lover has to die. You don't have to do this. Whatever happened with your brother, my brother was murdered by your monster, executed in the woods like an animal while you slept safe in Soren's fortress." Daniel's voice was cold, controlled. "He deserves justice. And you, Miss Morrison, are going to watch him get it." "I'm not watching anything. You don't have a choice. I'm sending you a live feed. Watch what happens when someone thinks they're untouchable. Watch what happens when empires fall." The call disconnected, and seconds later, a video link appeared on her phone. Claire's hand shook as she opened it, unable to look away despite every instinct screaming at her to stop. The video showed a warehouse, stark and industrial, with Nikolai in the center surrounded by at least a dozen armed men. He looked calm, controlled, but Claire could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand kept moving toward his jacket, where she knew he carried a weapon. Daniel Kane stepped into frame, and the resemblance to his brother was striking. Same build, same predatory grace, same eyes that promised violence. "You made a mistake killing Victor," Daniel said, his voice carrying clearly through the phone's speaker. "You made an enemy who won't stop until you're dead." "Your brother made his choice," Nikolai replied, his tone even. "He brought armed men to my home and tried to kill me. I simply finished what he started. And now I'm finishing what he couldn't." Claire watched in horror as Daniel pulled out a gun, watched as Nikolai's security team tensed, watched as the warehouse exploded into chaos. Gunfire erupted from every direction, muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness, and she couldn't tell who was shooting at whom, couldn't see if Nikolai was hit, couldn't do anything but watch through her fingers as the man she loved fought for his life. Marcus burst into the room, his expression grim. "Miss Morrison, you need to come with me right now." "What's happening? Is Nikolai—" "We're evacuating. Daniel's men are approaching the estate. We have maybe 10 minutes before they breach the perimeter. But the security has been compromised. Someone on the inside gave them access codes." Marcus grabbed her arm, pulling her toward a door she'd never noticed before. "There's a safe room in the basement. You'll be protected there until backup arrives." They ran through corridors Claire had never explored, down stairs that seemed to descend forever, until finally Marcus pushed open a reinforced door that looked like it belonged in a bank vault. "Get inside. Lock it from within. Don't open it for anyone except me or Mr. Soren. Understand?" Claire nodded, too terrified to speak. "He's going to survive this," Marcus said, and there was something almost gentle in his voice. "Mr. Soren is too mean to die. Trust me." Then the door closed, and Claire was alone in a room designed to survive an apocalypse, with nothing but her phone and the terrible video feed still streaming from the warehouse. She watched as Nikolai fought with a precision that spoke of years surviving in a world that wanted him dead. watched as he took down 3 of Daniel's men before disappearing behind cover. Watched as the warehouse descended into complete chaos, smoke and shadows making it impossible to see clearly. And then the feed cut out, replaced by a message that made her stomach drop. Connection lost. Claire sank down onto the single cot in the safe room, her phone clutched in her shaking hands, and did the only thing she could do. She waited. So, time became meaningless in the safe room. Minutes felt like hours, hours felt like days, and Claire's mind conjured increasingly horrible scenarios of what might be happening outside. She heard sounds occasionally, muffled gunfire, shouting, something that might have been an explosion, but the reinforced walls made everything distant and unclear. Her phone battery was dying, the percentage dropping steadily as she refreshed news sites looking for any information about a warehouse shootout or violence in the mountains. But there was nothing, just normal news and normal life, continuing for people who had no idea that empires were collapsing blocks away from their comfortable existences. When the battery finally died, plunging her into darkness broken only by emergency lights, Claire let herself cry. She cried for the girl she'd been before all this, for the innocence she'd lost, for the impossible situation she'd chosen. She cried for her mother, who might lose her daughter to violence she'd never know about. And she cried for Nikolai, who tried to be better than his circumstances and might die because of it. She must have fallen asleep eventually, because she woke to the sound of the door's locks disengaging. Claire scrambled backward on the cot, her heart hammering, looking for anything she could use as a weapon. But when the door opened, it wasn't Daniel Kane or his men standing there. It was Nikolai. He looked like he'd been through hell, clothes torn, blood on his face and hands, a gash across his forehead that had been hastily bandaged. But he was alive, standing, looking at her with eyes that held relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. "Claire," he breathed, crossing the room in 2 strides and pulling her into his arms. She clung to him, feeling his heartbeat against her cheek, solid and real and alive. "I thought you were dead. The video cut out and I couldn't see. I'm here. I'm alive. Daniel Kane isn't." Claire pulled back to look at him. "You killed him. He gave me no choice. He came to that warehouse determined to die or see me dead, and I chose to survive." Nikolai's jaw tightened. His men scattered when he fell. Most of them surrendered. The ones who didn't are no longer a problem. And the estate? Marcus said they were coming. They got as far as the outer walls before my reinforcements arrived. No one breached the main house. You were safe the entire time. He cupped her face, and his hands were trembling. "I'm sorry I put you through this. Sorry you had to watch that video, had to be locked in this room, terrified and alone." "I chose this," Claire said, echoing the words that had become their truth. "I chose you, knowing this was part of your world. You don't have to apologize for surviving. But you shouldn't have to live in fear because of my enemies. Then don't have enemies." The words hung between them, and Nikolai let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. If only it were that simple. "Make it that simple." Claire gripped his torn shirt, holding him close. "You've been building this empire for 20 years, surviving by being harder and meaner than everyone around you. But what if you stopped? What if you took all that power and influence and turned it into something legitimate? You're talking about walking away from everything I've built. I'm talking about transforming what you've built. The legitimate businesses, the community programs, the things that actually help people. What if that became your focus instead of just a cover for the rest?" Nikolai was quiet for a long moment, and Claire could see him turning the idea over in his mind, weighing possibilities against probabilities. "It would take time," he said finally. "Years, probably. Carefully extracting myself from operations, finding people to take over territories, ensuring transitions happen without war. And there would still be danger, people who'd see it as weakness, who'd try to take advantage. But it would be possible? Maybe. If I was careful, if I was patient." He looked at her, and there was something fragile in his expression. "Is that what you want? For me to walk away from this life? I want you to live long enough that we get to grow old together. I want you to stop making enemies who send armed men to our home. I want to love you without wondering if every goodbye might be the last one." Claire felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "I'm in love with you, Nikolai. and I'm terrified that loving you means losing you." He kissed her then, gentle despite the violence still fresh on his hands, and when he pulled back, his own eyes were wet. "I love you too," he whispered. "More than I thought I was capable of loving anyone. And if walking away from this world means keeping you, means building a life where you're not terrified every time I leave the house, then that's what I'll do." "You mean it?" "I've spent 20 years surviving. Maybe it's time I started actually living." He pressed his forehead to hers. "It won't be easy. It won't be fast. But I'll find a way out of this life, if it means finding a way into a real future with you." Claire held him close, feeling the weight of his promise settle over them like a blanket. It wouldn't be simple. Nothing with Nikolai ever was. But it was possible, and possibility was more than she'd had when this started. "Take me home," she said quietly. "To the penthouse. I want to sleep in our bed and wake up knowing you're safe beside me." "Our bed," Nikolai repeated, and there was wonder in his voice. "I like the sound of that." They left the safe room together, Marcus waiting outside with a relief so visible it was almost comical. "Both of you need medical attention," he said, looking at Nikolai's injuries and Claire's tear-stained face. "We'll survive," Nikolai replied. "We always do." The drive back to the city was quiet, both of them lost in thoughts too complex to voice. But their hands stayed linked the entire way, a silent promise that whatever came next, they'd face it together. The transition Nikolai had promised took 18 months of careful maneuvering, quiet negotiations, and strategic withdrawals from operations that had defined his empire. He sold territories to rivals who'd proven themselves trustworthy, converted illegal businesses into legitimate ones, and slowly transformed from crime lord to businessman with a questionable past but a clean present. There were challenges, threats from people who saw his withdrawal as weakness, attempts to take advantage during the transition, moments when violence seemed like the only solution and Nikolai had to consciously choose another path. But through it all, Claire was there, building her tutoring programs into a full-fledged nonprofit organization that served hundreds of kids, supporting Nikolai's transformation and slowly becoming the partner he'd never thought he'd have. Her mother's health continued to improve, and eventually she was strong enough to move from the medical center to a comfortable apartment Nikolai provided. She never knew the full truth of what her daughter had sacrificed for her survival, but she knew enough to be grateful. "You found yourself a good man," Margaret said one afternoon, squeezing Claire's hand. "Complicated, maybe, a little mysterious, but good where it counts." Claire smiled, thinking about all the things her mother didn't know and never would. "Yeah, Mom, he's pretty good." The youth centers expanded to 8 locations, reaching kids across the entire city. Claire hired teachers and counselors, created programs for art and music and sports, built something that actually mattered in communities that had been forgotten by everyone else. And Nikolai, slowly but surely, became someone different from the man who'd walked into her diner with blood on his cufflinks. Not innocent. He'd never be that. And Claire didn't want him to be. But better. More focused on building than destroying, on protecting than punishing, on being the kind of man who deserved the love she'd given him. Alexandra Chen retired from the life entirely, moving to London with Valentino and sending postcards about art galleries and afternoon tea. Dominic Russo died peacefully in his sleep, his empire divided among children who promptly turned it legitimate. The old guard gradually faded away, replaced by a new generation that didn't remember when fear was the only currency that mattered. And Claire and Nikolai built a life together that was messy and complicated and nothing like either of them had imagined, but was theirs in ways that mattered more than perfection. 2 years after that night in the mountain safe room, Claire stood on the penthouse terrace, watching the sun set over a city that no longer belonged to anyone. Nikolai came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How far we've come. How different everything is from that night I stumbled drunk into your private lounge. You called me a bad boy. You were something far more dangerous." Was. He turned her to face him, and his eyes were warm with affection and amusement. "I prefer to think I still am. Just dangerous in different ways now." Claire laughed, the sound free and genuine. "True. You're definitely still dangerous to my peace of mind." "Good. I'd hate to become boring." They stood there together as the city lit up beneath them, millions of lives continuing without any knowledge of the transformation that had happened in the shadows. Kids were safer because of the programs Claire had built. Communities were stronger because of the legitimate businesses Nikolai had created, and two people who should never have found each other had somehow built something real from impossible circumstances. "Do you ever regret it?" Nikolai asked quietly. "Choosing to stay? Choosing this life?" Claire thought about the question, really thought about it. She thought about the girl she'd been, exhausted, desperate, drowning in medical debt and fear. She thought about the woman she'd become, strong, purposeful, building something that mattered. She thought about her mother, alive and thriving, painting watercolors in her sunny apartment. And she thought about the man holding her who'd been willing to transform his entire world because she'd asked him to. "Not even for a second," she said. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. Even though I'm a reformed criminal with a violent past and enemies who occasionally resurface, especially because of that." "You chose to change, Nikolai. Not because you had to, but because you wanted to be someone worthy of the love I was giving you. That means everything." He kissed her softly, and Claire felt the same flutter in her chest that she'd felt that first night in the library, that first choice to stay instead of run. "Marry me," he said against her lips. Claire pulled back, her eyes wide. "What?" "Marry me. Not because of obligation or debt or any of the reasons that brought us together. Just because I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of the choice you made." "You're asking me to marry you on the terrace? No ring? No grand gesture?" "I'm asking you to marry me because this is where we always talk about the important things. And yes, there's a ring." He pulled a small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a diamond that caught the city lights and threw them back in rainbows. "I've been carrying it around for 3 weeks waiting for the right moment. But standing here with you, watching the sunset over a city we helped make better, feels as right as any moment will ever be." Claire looked at the ring, at the man offering it, at the life they'd built together from wreckage and impossible choices. She thought about cages and freedom, about how sometimes the most confining circumstances led to the most expansive lives. "Yes," she said, and the word felt like the culmination of every choice she'd made since that drunken night. "Yes. I'll marry you." Nikolai slipped the ring on her finger with shaking hands, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, "for choosing me, for staying, for believing I could be better than what I was. Thank you for giving me the choice, for making it real instead of forced, for loving me enough to change everything." They stood there on the terrace as night fell completely, wrapped around each other, and Claire understood something she'd been trying to articulate since that morning in the mountain library. Love wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about safety or security or finding someone without flaws. Love was about choosing someone despite their darkness, seeing their potential even when they couldn't see it themselves, and building something beautiful from the broken pieces of complicated lives. She had called him a bad boy that first night, drunk and reckless, and too far gone to understand the danger she was courting. He had been something far more dangerous, a man capable of both salvation and destruction, of tenderness and violence, of building empires and burning them down. But in the end, they had chosen each other, not because they were trapped, not because circumstances forced them together, but because love, real, complicated, messy love, was worth fighting for. And that made all the difference, Chevron. 6 months later, Claire Morrison became Claire Soren in a private ceremony attended by a handful of people who'd witnessed their transformation. Her mother cried happy tears, beautiful and healthy in a way that seemed miraculous. Marcus stood as Nikolai's best man, his professional composure cracking just enough to show genuine joy. And the kids from the youth centers sent a video of themselves singing congratulations, their voices bright with hope that hadn't existed before Claire came into their lives. The penthouse had become their true home, no longer a gilded cage but a sanctuary they'd chosen together. The bedroom door stayed unlocked because it didn't need to be locked anymore. The guards were minimal because the threats had faded into memory. And the life they built was messy and real and absolutely nothing like the transaction it had started as. Claire continued expanding her nonprofit, eventually opening centers in other cities, spreading the model of actually caring about forgotten kids. Nikolai ran his legitimate businesses with the same precision he'd once applied to criminal enterprises, but now the empire he built helped communities instead of exploiting them. Some nights they would sit on the terrace and talk about the past, about mistakes made and lessons learned, about violence survived and choices that changed everything. Other nights they focused on the future, on possibilities and dreams and the life they were still building together. "Do you ever miss it?" Claire asked him one evening. "The power, the fear, the certainty that came with being dangerous?" Nikolai considered the question carefully. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity. When I was just the monster everyone feared, I didn't have to question my decisions or worry about being better. But then I look at you, at the life we've built, at the person I've become because you believed I could be more than my worst moments, and I wouldn't trade this for anything. Even on the hard days? Especially on the hard days, because the hard days prove this is real, that we're building something that matters instead of just surviving." Claire leaned into him, watching the city lights sparkle like scattered stars. Her mother was alive, her nonprofit was changing lives, and the man beside her had transformed from captor to partner, from monster to human, from transaction to choice. It had started with a drunken mistake, a stumble into a world she didn't understand, and a man who'd seen something in her that even she hadn't recognized. It had grown through impossible choices, gilded cages, and violence that should have sent her running, but instead taught her the difference between survival and living. It had transformed through honesty and freedom, through choosing to stay when leaving was possible, through building something real from the ashes of coercion. And it had become this, a love story that defied every convention, that shouldn't have worked but somehow did, that proved people could change if they wanted to badly enough, and if someone believed in them fiercely enough. Claire Morrison had called Nikolai Sorin a bad boy, drunk enough to miss the danger and reckless enough not to care. He had been something far more dangerous, a man capable of both saving her mother and killing his enemies, of building empires and transforming them, of being exactly what she needed even when she didn't know she needed it. But what began as manipulation and survival had become the truest thing in both their lives. They had chosen each other again and again, through every trial and transformation. And in the end, that choice, free and real and entirely their own, made all the difference. The city sprawled beneath them, indifferent to their story, continuing its endless rhythm of lives lived and forgotten. But on that terrace, in that moment, two people who'd found each other in the worst possible way had built the best possible life. And they had done it by choosing, not being chosen for, by staying, not being kept, by loving, not being loved at. The cage door had been open for years now, and every single day Claire Morrison Sorin chose to stay. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. And that made all the difference in the world.